Welcome back to the channel. Take a good hard look at this image. On the left, a science teacher loved by his town. On the right, a masked kidnapper wearing a gun like a clown. At a glance, they are worlds apart. But the thing is, less than 2 miles from the crime scene, police just found an object that might blur that line completely: a black glove discarded on the roadside. It is a chilling match to the cheap gear the attacker wore. Meanwhile, the FBI hit Tommaso's door for the 6th time, leaving with a mysterious paper bag. Did they find the other glove inside his home? For 10 days we have debated. Familiar eyes. But today, no more feelings. I am weighing Tommaso Cioni against the masked man with 5 deadly coincidences the police cannot ignore. Trust me, these details are much colder than you think. So, let's get right into the first, and perhaps the most tangible coincidence in this whole nightmare: the $100 kidnap kit. When digital investigators and internet sleuths began to zoom into that high-definition video from the front porch, they realized something very strange. This person was not using high-end tactical equipment or specialized gear you would expect from a professional operative. What I found was that the intruder was using a basic ski mask that costs about $22 and a nylon holster that sells for the exact same price at local sporting goods stores in Tucson. Even the backpack, an Ozark brand with those distinct reflective straps, is something anyone could pick up on a quick trip to a big box retailer. But the thing is, the most revealing part of this outfit might be the hands. The intruder was wearing black gloves made of a synthetic rubber called nitrile. These are not tactical gloves. They are the kind often used by plumbers, gas station employees, or people working in food service, because they do not break down when they touch chemicals or oil. A pack of 100 of these gloves costs a mere $10. It is a cheap, disposable choice for a crime that felt anything but cheap. What happened next is where the story takes a turn that is honestly hard to believe. Just as the search for Nancy was reaching a fever pitch, investigators located a pair of black gloves abandoned on the side of the road. The reason this matters is the location. They were found less than 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home, right along a potential escape route. These gloves bore a striking resemblance to the ones seen in that chilling surveillance video. But here is the twist that has everyone talking. On that very same day, news cameras from Fox 4 captured something incredible. Federal agents were back at the home of Annie Guthrie and Tommaso Cioni. This was not their first visit. In fact, it was the 5th or 6th time law enforcement had swarmed that property. What struck me here was the sight of investigators leaving the house carrying a brown paper bag of presumed evidence. In the world of forensics, this is a massive red flag. At this point, you have to ask yourself, why a paper bag? In other words, in standard crime scene investigation procedures, paper bags are used specifically for biological evidence. If you put wet or biological items, like a glove damp with sweat, into a plastic bag, the moisture gets trapped and can grow mold, which literally eats the DNA evidence. Paper allows the evidence to breathe, preserving the genetic material for the lab, which tells us that whatever the FBI took from Tommaso Cioni's house, they believed it carried a biological signature that needed to be protected at all costs. Meanwhile, we have to look at the man himself. From everything I found in the investigative files, Tommaso Cioni is described as an ordinary, low-key dad and a science teacher. He is a guy who loves making homemade pasta and foraging for berries. For a science guy who spends his time teaching 6th graders about biology and working around the house, having a box of black nitrile gloves in the garage is not just normal, it is expected. It is a common tool for someone who likes to get their hands dirty with hobbies or home repairs. The problem is, when you put those two things together, the picture gets very dark. You have a pair of gloves found on the road just 2 miles away, and you have federal agents leaving the son-in-law's house with a bag meant to protect DNA evidence. At this point, I started questioning if the police had finally found the match they were looking for. If the DNA from the glove on the road matches the samples taken from that paper bag, it is not just a coincidence anymore, it is a smoking gun. Which means the pressure on the family is reaching a breaking point. The transition from being a grieving relative to a subject of a fifth search is a heavy one to carry. And this is important because while the sheriff continues to say there are 0 suspects, the physical evidence seems to be whispering a very different name. From there, every single move the investigators make is being watched by millions, waiting to see if that paper bag contains the answer we have all been searching for. From there, we move away from the physical evidence left on the ground and step right into the hard, uncompromising science of biometrics. This is where the digital reconstruction of the suspect starts to get really uncomfortable for anyone close to the Guthrie family circle. You see, the FBI did not just release that 44-second video to show us a scary man on a porch. They released it because they knew the biology hidden behind that mask would eventually scream louder than a single fingerprint ever could. What I found was that forensic video analysts have been harvesting every possible clue from those grainy frames. By using the bricks on Nancy's front entrance as a fixed geometric guide, experts believe the suspect's height is somewhere between 5 feet 9 inches and 5 feet 11 inches. They estimate his weight at up to 230 pounds. In other words, we are looking for a male who is described as somewhat stocky, not a lean individual. The thing is, when you look at the way he moves, experts like Susan Constantine have pointed out that he seems significantly longer torsoed with shorter legs and a very broad hip region. These are the structural realities of the human skeleton that you simply cannot fake with baggy clothes or heavy jackets. And then, there is the specific detail that stopped the entire internet in its tracks: the eyebrows. If you zoom in on the high-resolution infrared images, you can clearly see the suspect's eyebrows peeking out from the eye holes of the ski mask. And they are not bushy, wild, or unkempt. They are manicured. They are groomed. This implies a level of self-care and routine that you do not typically associate with a desperate, random criminal. This suggests someone who looks in the mirror, someone who takes the time to shape their appearance carefully. It suggests a person who fits neatly into society, perhaps someone you would see at a local grocery store or even a school classroom, looking perfectly put together and professional. Which tells us that the manicured detail pushes the forensic profile away from a random attacker and pulls it much closer to someone local, someone with a reputation to uphold. And this matters because it brings us straight back to the profile of Tommaso Cioni. From the investigative files, we know Tommaso is a 50-year-old science teacher who has spent 15 years in the classroom. But he is also a bass player and sometimes a vocalist for an indie rock band called Early Black. He has that specific artistic, indie style. His profile as an educator and a musician fits the groomed description perfectly. In many of his family photos, you see a man who is clearly well-groomed with that specific artistic vibe that matches the intruder in the video. At the same time, we have to talk about those eyes. The suspect has been described as having big, almond-shaped, dark eyes. On social media, people immediately started calling them familiar eyes. The reason this matters is that we, as humans, are biologically programmed to recognize faces, and even with a mask on, those eyes carried a weight of recognition that was visceral to those who knew him. The problem is, many people can have a similar build or a common eye color. But these specific biological markers, when layered together, narrow the suspect pool significantly. What happened next was a startling example of how powerful this recognition can be. Only 8 hours after the video went public, police in South Tucson pulled over a delivery driver named Carlos Palazuelos. They detained him for questioning and searched his family home simply because they thought his eyes matched the man in the video perfectly. just because their eyes looked alike. An innocent person was arrested and their house searched. Do you think this was necessary shrewdness or a dangerous, hasty action that could lead to the wrongful conviction? Does this detail really reflect that? Please leave your thoughts in the comments. Which means that while Carlos was eventually released because he had an airtight alibi, the suspicion surrounding the familiar eyes hasn't just vanished. It just shifted focus. Because while Carlos could prove where he was, we still have not seen a confirmed public alibi for Tommaso Cioni during that critical 4-hour window between 9:50 p.m. and 1:47 a.m. What I found was that Tommaso's own physical profile matches the biometric data harvested from the cloud footage almost point for point. The height, the stocky build, the artistic grooming, and those deep, almond-shaped eyes. Because of that, the court of public opinion has been relentless. The transition from a science teacher to a subject of international scrutiny happened in the blink of an eye. Meanwhile, the FBI continues to work on a more detailed composite based on the mouth and the potential facial hair. They believe they see a mustache, which again fits the recent descriptions of Tommaso. At this point, you have to ask yourself, is it just a tragic series of coincidences, or is the cold math of biology starting to bury the son-in-law? The geometry of a face does not lie, and those manicured eyebrows are a choice. From there, every single pixel of that restored data is being compared to every photo of the son-in-law, looking for that one undeniable detail that can either clear his name or seal his fate. The reason this matters is that in such a high-profile case, the pressure to find a match is immense. This matters because, as the investigation enters its second week, those familiar eyes will continue to haunt this investigation until we finally know the truth. At the same time, we need to step away from the physical masks and the cheap gear and move into a much more chilling territory, the realm of behavioral psychology. This is where the mask truly begins to slip, not revealing a face, but revealing a mind. When you watch that footage, the first thing that hits you is not fear. It is the intruder's total lack of it. He is not breaking in, he is sauntering. He moves with a level of calmness that borders on pure, unadulterated arrogance. There is no frantic checking of the perimeter, no nervous glances over his shoulder. Instead, he walks up to that camera with the leisure of a man checking his own mail on a Sunday morning. This is not the body language of a stranger in a strange land. What happened next is the moment that has kept experts like Megyn Kelly and former federal agents talking for days. The intruder walks up to the camera, and he does not flinch. He does not try to hide his hands or duck his head in shame. Instead, he reaches out and gives the lens two light, rhythmic taps. Tap, tap. It is a gesture so casual, so mundane, that it feels like someone checking a microphone or tapping on a familiar piece of furniture as they walk by their own living room. In other words, this is the textbook definition of what we call ownership behavior. In the world of criminal profiling, ownership is a state of mind where the perpetrator feels they have a legitimate right to be in that specific space. He does not act like a thief in a stranger's home. He acts like an owner in his own backyard. The problem is, why would a total stranger feel that way? This man showed zero fear of a dog barking or a neighbor looking through a window. He knew the layout of the porch. He knew exactly where that camera was positioned before he even reached the top step. He walked through that space with the subconscious confidence of someone who has walked those same steps at least 100 times before. At this point, I started questioning the timeline again. Remember, Tommaso Cioni was at that very house only 4 hours before the security system was severed. He had just finished dinner there. He had just played games with the family. The environment, the smells, and the layout were all still fresh in his mind. Which means, if we consider the ownership theory, the intruder's behavior starts to make a terrifying kind of sense. When you are in a place you know intimately, Your subconscious takes over your movements. You do not sneak, you move according to your habits. That rhythmic tap on the camera lens is not a calculated criminal move. It is a habitual gesture. It is the kind of thing you do to an object you see every single day, like checking the stability of a railing or the glass on a window. The reason this matters is because it suggests that the person behind that mask was not just familiar with the house. They were comfortable in it. They were at home in the silence of 2 a.m. Meanwhile, we have to look at the arrogance of it all. This intruder was so convinced of his control over the situation that he took his time to cover the lens with vegetation as if he were performing a routine chore. He was not worried about the clock ticking. He was not worried about being caught in the act. He behaved as if he were performing a boring, repetitive task in a place where he knew he would never be disturbed. From there, we have to ask, who else fits that profile? Who else would have the mental blueprint of Nancy's home burned into their brain so deeply that they could navigate it in the dark without a single moment of hesitation? At this point, the contrast between a random kidnapper and someone with an insider's perspective becomes impossible to ignore. A stranger would be looking for an exit. This man was looking for a camera he already knew was there. A stranger would be tense, every muscle ready to snap. This man was sauntering with his hands relaxed. In other words, the psychological footprint left on that porch is just as distinct as a DNA sample. It tells a story of a man who did not feel like a criminal in that moment. He felt like he belonged. And that is perhaps the most chilling detail of all. Because if the intruder felt he had a right to be there at 2 a.m, then we are looking for someone who was a fundamental part of Nancy's life, not someone who was a total stranger. The transition from a family dinner at 10 at night to an abduction at 2 a.m. is a short one, but the psychological bridge between them is built on this very sense of ownership. This matters because it tells us that the person in that video was not just a kidnapper. He was a ghost of a visitor who had been there many times before. The reason this matters is that the subconscious mind cannot hide its habits, even behind a mask. However, we have arrived at the most controversial point of this entire investigation. This is the detail that divides the internet, splits the experts, and, arguably, might be the single reason why Tommaso Cioni is not sitting in a jail cell right at this very moment. It is the paradox of intelligence versus execution. Let us look at the facts of the suspect's behavior. When you strip away the fear and look at the mechanics of the crime, the kidnapper looks like a complete amateur. The most glaring example is the gun holster. As we discussed, he is wearing a belly band holster. This is a piece of equipment designed specifically to be worn against the skin, underneath a shirt to conceal a weapon for personal protection. But this man, he has strapped it over a thick, baggy jacket. It is loose. It is flopping around. It is objectively the wrong way to use that tool. A former Secret Service agent pointed out that no one with even a day of tactical training would ever wear a firearm like that. It screams incompetence. Then, look at the backpack. He is committing a felony in the dead of night, trying to remain unseen, yet he walks up to the door wearing a backpack with bright, reflective safety strips that glow when light hits them. It is the equivalent of wearing a neon sign that says, "Look at me." Now, compare that image to the man we are scrutinizing. Tommaso Cioni. He is not a drifter. He is not uneducated. He is a 50-year-old science teacher who has taught advanced placement biology. To teach at that level, you need a high degree of organization, critical thinking, and an understanding of cause and effect. You have to be smart. You have to be logical. Because of that, the defense from his supporters is loud and clear. Tommaso is too smart to be this stupid. They argue that a man of his intelligence would never wear a holster that could fall off or a backpack that shines in the dark. They say the clumsiness of the crime clears him. But I want you to think in reverse for a moment. I want you to step into the mind of a highly intelligent person who is planning a perfect crime. If you are a smart, logical science teacher, and you want to kidnap someone without getting caught, what is the number one thing you need to do? You need to make sure the police do not look for you. If Tommaso had walked up to that door moving like a SWAT team member, wearing high-end tactical gear, and disabling the camera with a laser or a signal jammer, the profile would immediately narrow down to someone with training, someone precise, someone like a science teacher who plans ahead. So, what do? You create a character, you perform a role, you deliberately buy the cheapest, most incorrect gear you can find at a big box store. You wear the holster wrong on purpose. You wear the reflective backpack to look like a transient or a confused amateur. You construct a visual profile of a disorganized offender, someone impulsive, uneducated, and sloppy. You want the FBI profilers to sit in a room and say, "We are looking for a banned substances addict or a local thug." So they stop looking at the respected educator with the master's degree. This concept is called staging, or more specifically, calculated incompetence. It is the ultimate camouflage. It is not just about hiding your face with a ski mask. It is about hiding your intelligence with a costume of stupidity. And if this was Tommaso's plan, we have to admit one terrifying truth: it is working. It is working because right now, we are debating it. It is working because the sheriff is hesitant to name a suspect. The amateur nature of the crime has created enough doubt to keep him free for 10 days. The clumsiness is not a mistake, it is the most sophisticated part of the entire plan. He is playing a character so well that half the world thinks he is innocent simply because the crime looks too messy for a smart man, which tells us that the one competence might actually be the most damning evidence of all. It suggests a level of manipulation that goes far beyond a simple kidnapping. It suggests a mind that understands how law enforcement thinks and is actively playing a game of chess against them. The belly band was not a mistake, it was a prop. The reflective strips were not an oversight, they were a costume. And the man behind the mask isn't stupid, he is banking on us being stupid enough to believe the act. So, I have to turn this question over to you, because this is the hinge the whole case swings on. What do you think? Was the kidnapper genuinely stupid for carrying the gun incorrectly? Or was he a genius playing the fool to mislead people? Let me know your verdict in the comments below. Because if this is a performance, it is one of the most dangerous high-wire acts we have ever seen. And as we move to the final coincidence, we will see that even the smartest plans leave a trail that no amount of acting can cover up. Meanwhile, we simply cannot ignore the timeline. In every investigation, time is the one thing you cannot fake, and in the case of Nancy Guthrie, the clock is telling a very specific story. According to the official timeline established by the Pima County Sheriff, Tommaso Cioni drove Nancy home and left her residence at 9:50 at night. The Nest camera system was manually disconnected at 1:47 in the morning. That gives us a gap of exactly 3 hours and 57 minutes. Call it 4 hours. Now, let us look at the geography. Tommaso and Annie live less than 4 miles away. In the middle of the night, with zero traffic on the Tucson roads, that is a drive of 10 minutes or less. 4 hours is an eternity in the world of crime. It is more than enough time to drive home, establish a quiet presence, wait for the neighborhood to go to sleep, and then change into that cheap, unrecognizable outfit we discussed earlier. It is enough time to drive back, park a safe distance away, walk to the house, perform the act, and be back in his own bed before the sun comes up. The timeline does not provide an alibi, it provides an opportunity. The reason this matters is because of what happened next in the digital world, the Bitcoin trap. Early in the investigation, rumors began to swirl from outlets like TMZ that there was a demand for $6 million in Bitcoin. It sounded like a massive, sophisticated ransom. But when investigators and local news outlets like K-Gone looked closer at the actual blockchain ledger, the reality was very different. There was no $6 million transfer. Instead, there was a single transaction of under $300 sent to that wallet address. Experts on the Megyn Kelly show called this tactic tickling the wire. It is a digital mousetrap. The FBI likely sent that small amount of money, $300, not as a payment, but as a test. They are watching that digital wallet 24 hours a day. They are waiting for one specific thing, for the kidnapper to log in and check the balance. The moment someone accesses that wallet to see if the money has arrived, their device sends a signal. It reveals an IP address. It reveals a location. If this kidnapping was the work of a Mexican cartel or a professional criminal enterprise, they would not be rattled by this. They would have sophisticated ways to launder that crypto, tumble the coins, and hide their tracks. They would move the money immediately. But that wallet has remained dead silent. There has been zero activity. This tells us that the person on the other end is terrified. They know it is a trap, or they are too paralyzed to make a move. And this brings us back to the profile of a high school science teacher. Think about the level of technological sophistication required here. The suspect knew enough about technology to know that a Wi-Fi camera needed to be disconnected. He knew enough to set up a Bitcoin wallet, which is something a science-minded person would understand, but he did not know enough to realize that the camera had already uploaded the ghost data to the cloud before he cut the power. He did not know that merely checking a Bitcoin balance could lead the FBI to his front door. This is what we call the middle ground of competency. It is not the work of a Luddite who knows nothing about tech, but it is also not the work of a dark web hacker. It fits the profile of an educated man, a teacher, someone who knows how things work but lacks the criminal experience to know how investigations work. The silence of that Bitcoin wallet suggests a lone actor who is in over his head. He is smart enough to set up the game, but now that the FBI is playing, he realizes he cannot make a move without getting caught. So, when you look at that 4-hour gap, do not just see empty time. See the logistics of a local man with a 10-minute commute. And when you look at that empty Bitcoin wallet, do not just see a failed ransom. See a suspect who is educated enough to be dangerous, but not professional enough to cash out. It is a specific level of knowledge that points away from random gangs and points directly toward a man with a master's degree who is currently sitting in a house that the FBI keeps searching. The timeline fits, the geography fits, and the technological footprint, or the lack of one, fits the profile of Tommaso Cioni perfectly. He had the time, he had the proximity, and he has the exact level of tech savviness to create this stalemate. And as we move to the final conclusion, you have to ask yourself, are these 5 coincidences? Or is this a pattern that only points in one direction? That is when we have to stop and be absolutely fair. As compelling as the case against the son-in-law might seem, and as tightly as the physical evidence appears to be coiling around him, we cannot ignore the other possibility. In true crime, tunnel vision is dangerous. If we step back and ask ourselves, if it is not Tommaso, then who else fits these 5 chilling coincidences? We land on a profile that is equally terrifying but for completely different reasons. We land on the profile of a stalker. Specifically, we are looking at a psychological condition known as erotomania. This is a delusional disorder where an individual believes that another person, usually someone of a higher social status or a celebrity, is in love with them. In this case, the target of that obsession would not be Nancy Guthrie, but her famous daughter, Savannah Guthrie. The problem is, Savannah is untouchable. She works at NBC, surrounded by professional security teams, secure entrances, and a lifestyle that keeps her far out of reach from the average person. For a stalker, she is a fortress. But her mother, Nancy was an 84-year-old woman living alone in a quiet neighborhood. In the dark logic of a predator, Nancy becomes what experts call a soft target. She is the proxy. She is the path of least resistance to get to the real object of his obsession. This theory radically changes how we interpret the intruder's behavior, particularly the ownership we discussed earlier. When the intruder sauntered up to the porch and tapped on the camera, it might not have been because he had been there physically 100 times before. It might have been because, in his delusion, he believed he was spiritually part of the family. He did not fear the camera because, in his twisted reality, he was not breaking in. He was stepping into a life he believed he deserved. That calm arrogance was not born of familiarity with the floor plan, but of a delusional entitlement to the people inside. And this brings us back to the eyebrows. Why would a kidnapper take the time to manicure his eyebrows before committing a felony? He sees it as a debut. He is stepping onto a stage where he knows Savannah will be watching. He is grooming himself for her. He wants to look presentable, even attractive, because in his mind, this is a romantic gesture or a twisted rescue mission, not an abduction. He is not a thug, he is a suitor. This also explains the paradox of the macher gear. If the suspect is a stalker, he is likely not a career criminal. He is an obsessive fan. He went to a sporting goods store and bought the basics, a $22 mask, a cheap holster, a reflective backpack, because that is all he could afford or access. He wore the gun wrong because he has never been trained to use one. He only bought it because he thought it made him look powerful or protected. The clumsiness we see is not a disguise. It is the genuine incompetence of a man driven by passion rather than profit. The reason this matters most is the silence of the Bitcoin wallet. If this was a professional kidnapping for ransom, the money would be moving. But if this is a stalker, money is irrelevant. He does not want $6 million. He wants attention. He wants acknowledgement. This explains why the ransom notes were sent to TMZ and media outlets instead of being quietly negotiated with the family. He is using the media to speak directly to Savannah. Every headline, every plea from the family on national television feeds his delusion that he is now in a relationship with them. That power is far more valuable than any cryptocurrency. So, while the physical evidence points to the son-in-law, the psychological evidence opens a door to a stranger in the shadows. A man who believes that by taking the mother, he has finally captured the attention of the daughter, and, in many ways, an unpredictable stalker with a delusional mission is far more dangerous than any family member with a grudge. So, after walking through every frame of footage and every line of the police timeline, we are standing at a definitive crossroads. On one side of the road, we have Tommaso Cioni. We have a man weighed down by 5 deadly coincidences that are becoming harder and harder to ignore. We have the matching physical build, the meticulously manicured eyebrows that mirror his own, and the psychological ownership of a man who tapped the camera like he owned the porch. We have the paradox of a brilliant science teacher wearing a costume of incompetence, and we have a timeline that left a 4-hour gap wide enough to hide a felony. On the other side of the road, we have the ghost of a phantom. We have the theory of the obsessive stalker. This represents the chaos factor, the idea that a stranger could slip in from the shadows, perform a bizarre ritual for an audience of one, and vanish without a trace. It is a terrifying possibility because it means random chaos visited a quiet home in Tucson. But we have to look at the evidence that is right in front of us. What struck me here was the image of that brown paper bag being carried out of Tommaso's home by federal agents. In the world of criminal investigation, a paper bag is never just a container. It is not used for trash. It is not used for documents. It is used for one specific purpose, to hold living evidence. It is designed to let biological samples breathe so that mold does not destroy the DNA. That simple brown sack is a time capsule of biological truth. It is the difference between a theory and a conviction. If that bag contains the rest of the box of nitrile gloves that matches the one found on the roadside, or if it holds a receipt for a $22 ski mask from a local sporting goods store, then all the theories about stalkers and cartels will collapse in an instant. The entire mystery will dissolve in the face of a single, naked truth. That bag represents the potential end of the line for Tommaso Cioni, or it represents his ultimate vindication. This is the part I could not get past. If Tommaso is indeed the man behind the mask, we are looking at a level of duality that is almost impossible to comprehend. How can a son-in-law, a father, and a beloved teacher stand in front of news cameras, hug his grieving family, and play the role of the devastated relative while hiding a kidnap kit in his garage? How can someone act so normal when they know exactly where Nancy is? It suggests a level of sociopathy that is chilling to even consider. However, we must also ask ourselves the hard question. Are we suffering from confirmation bias? Are we looking at Tommaso and seeing a monster simply because he was the last person to see her alive? Are we connecting the dots because they are actually there, or are we connecting them because our brains desperate crave a solution to a frightening puzzle? When the police say there are no named suspects, are they being cautious, or are they telling us that we are all looking in the wrong direction? Is it possible that while we analyze the eyebrows of a science teacher, a real predator is watching from the sidelines, laughing at how easily we were distracted? The mask has not officially fallen yet, but the ground is shifting. Right now, as you watch this video, that black glove found on the side of the road is likely sitting in a sterile forensic laboratory. Technicians are extracting skin cells, sweat, and oil. They are building a genetic profile that does not lie and does not care about our theories. With that glove in the lab, and that paper bag in evidence, I believe the truth is no longer a matter of if, but when. The alibi of the familiar eyes is shaking violently, and the science is about to deliver a verdict that no amount of acting can hide. So, now I am turning this investigation over to you. You have seen the evidence. You have seen the 5 coincidences. Which scenario do you believe is the truth? Is this the tragic case of the son-in-law, a man whose amateur disguise fooled the world but could not fool the forensics? Or is this the work of the stalker, a dangerous stranger who is still out there, waiting for his next chance to send a message? Drop your thoughts and your theories in the comments below. I will be reading every single one of them to see where you stand. Nancy Guthrie is still missing, and until she is found, we will not stop asking these questions. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next update.
The house, as you said, belongs to Annie Guthrie and her husband, but it has been empty for the last several days with only security guards parked outside, and they remain here tonight. Now, the purpose of their presence here this evening, the Sheriff's Department telling NBC News they are continuing to conduct follow-ups in the investigation into the disappearance of 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie.
Imagine a pool of blood drying on a quiet Arizona porch, and right next to it, a discarded bottle of heart medication. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old, and these pills are her lifeline. Think about it. Any kidnapper smart enough to disable a security system knows a dead hostage pays $0. Leaving that medicine behind is a death sentence. This glaring contradiction forced me to ask one haunting question: was this ever a real abduction, or just a clumsy stage play meant to hide a crime that ended right at her doorstep? To find the truth, I have spent countless hours digging through every single page of the Pima County search warrants. I cross-referenced raw surveillance video with digital location history to map out the real timeline. What I discovered buried in those files is a dark reality that looks nothing like the sanitized story officials are telling. So, before we even start analyzing the forensic evidence or squinting at that grainy surveillance footage, we have to take a step back and look at the motive. Most people want to jump straight to the horror, but the why is always found in the foundation of the home. Nancy Guthrie did not just end up in Tucson by mistake. She moved to the desert specifically to be closer to her daughter Annie and her son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni. On the surface, this was a story about family values. We are looking at a group of people with absolutely no history of violence. Not a single emergency 911 call was ever logged at that address. There were no messy court battles, no public feuds, and no neighbors reporting strange noises in the middle of the night. It looked like the perfect retirement for an 84-year-old woman. But, as anyone who has ever lived in a small town knows, silence does not always mean everything is fine. Sometimes, silence is just a very expensive veil. We need to talk about the money, because in cases like this, the money usually tells the truth when people will not. Nancy lived in a gorgeous adobe-style home tucked away in the Catalina foothills. If you know anything about Tucson real estate, you know that this area is where the elite live. We are talking about houses with panoramic mountain views and infinity pools. Experts in the local market estimate that Nancy's property is worth at least $2 million. Now, let us pause for a second and do the math. If you divide that $2 million asset among her 3 children, each branch of the family stands to inherit nearly $700,000. The thing is, $700,000 is a lot of money to almost anyone, but it is a fortune to someone living on an educator's salary. Tommaso Cioni spent years working in academia and teaching. It is a respected life, but it is rarely a wealthy one. At the same time, we have to look at the reality of Nancy's health. She was 84 years old. She had a pacemaker and a list of prescriptions as long as your arm, which means that while the love might have been there, the burden was also there. Constant medical checkups, the looming threat of expensive nursing home care, and the daily grind of monitoring an elderly parent can create a very specific kind of resentment. It is a slow-burning fire that most families never talk about. What I found was that while the world saw a grandmother enjoying her golden years, there might have been a very different conversation happening behind closed doors. Maybe someone was looking at the rising cost of healthcare and the stagnating value of their own bank account. In other words, the house in the hills was not just a home anymore. It was a massive, untapped life insurance policy waiting for a signature. Which tells us that the opportunity was there. And the motive was definitely there. You see, the problem with a $2 million inheritance is that it only becomes real when the owner is gone. And for someone struggling to make ends meet, that wait can start to feel like an eternity. And this is important because we have to ask ourselves if we are looking at a tragic disappearance or a calculated financial move. At this point, the lack of conflict in the official records actually starts to look suspicious. How can a family be that perfect? From there, I started thinking about the psychological toll of caregiving. It is a heavy weight to carry. And sometimes, people just want to be free of it, especially if there is a massive payday waiting on the other side. The reason this matters is that it changes the way we see every single interaction that happened on that final night. Was it a loving dinner, or was it a final inspection? This leads me to a detail that really disturbed me. While Savannah was off building her own wealth, the local family in Tucson was the one doing the heavy lifting. They were the ones dealing with the doctors and the daily needs. That kind of inequality can breed a very bitter type of jealousy. Which brings me to this shock. Could financial pressure and $2 million create a killer? Tell your thoughts below. What happened next is the part that truly turns this investigation from a tragedy into something much more chilling. We need to walk through the final hours of January 31st carefully. Everything seemed normal. Tommaso Cioni drove Nancy home after they had finished their dinner together. At 9:48 in the evening, his car pulled into a quiet driveway in the Catalina foothills. The car went inside, and for a moment, the house was a sanctuary. Just 2 minutes later, at 9:50 in the evening, the garage door closed and Tommaso drove away. According to official records, Nancy Guthrie was safely inside her home, locked away from the world. But this is where the story starts to fracture. If this was a random predator or a professional kidnapper who had followed them from the restaurant, you would expect them to strike immediately. Usually things go this way. They take advantage of the transition the moment the door is unlocked or the minute the lights go out. Digital evidence shows otherwise. The house sat in undisturbed silence for nearly 4 hours. The Ring doorbell camera was active, the sensors were on, and nothing moved. At the same time, the desert night was getting colder, dropping down toward freezing. The problem is, the security system was not disabled until 1:47 in the morning on February 1st. Think about that for a second. That is a massive gap of 3 hours and 57 minutes. It was not until nearly 2 in the morning that a masked figure finally appeared on the porch and cut the connection to the camera. What struck me here was the sheer absurdity of that level of patience. If this was a stranger, why crouch in freezing shadows for 4 hours after the only other person left the house? It does not make any logical sense for a stalker to wait that long when the house was at its most vulnerable, the moment Tommaso drove away. Why wait until the dead of night to step onto that porch? The reason this matters is because that 4-hour window changes everything about the suspect list. In other words, this was not a crime of opportunity, it was a crime of timing. Looking at the map, 4 hours is more than enough time for someone to drive across town, go into their own home, change into dark clothing, grab a hiking backpack, and return without raising a single red flag. Which means, the person who disabled that camera at 1:47 in the morning did not have to be someone who was hiding in the bushes. They could have been someone who had been there earlier, someone who knew exactly when the house would be quiet, and someone who had a perfect excuse to be on the road that night. And this is important because it points toward a level of premeditation that is terrifying. If you are a stranger, you are taking a huge risk by lingering. Every minute you wait is a minute someone might look out a window or a police cruiser might roll by. But if you are someone who knows the schedule of the house, that 4-hour gap is not a wait. It is a tactical window. You go home, you establish an alibi, you wait for the neighborhood to fall into its deepest sleep, and then you come back to finish the job. Which tells us that whoever did this was not just lucky. They were calculated. They knew the layout. They knew the cameras. From there, we have to ask about the digital footprint. Was there any movement detected by internal sensors during those 4 hours? So far, the authorities have been very quiet about that. But what we do know is that the silence ended at 1:47. That is the moment the mask went on and the lights went out for Nancy. At this point, the question is not just who did it, but where were they during that long, dark interval between 9:50 and 1:47? The answer is the key to the mystery. We must find the truth. At this point, we have to look closely at how the attacker actually operated that night. When investigators arrived at the property in the Catalina foothills, they immediately noticed something very strange about the perimeter of the house. There was absolutely no sign of forced entry. The windows were perfectly intact, the door frames were not splintered, and the locks were completely undamaged. This means the person who took Nancy Guthrie either had a key, knew the security codes, or was someone she trusted enough to open the door for in the middle of the night. It tells us that things went wrong before the victim even left her property. The supposed master plan fell apart immediately. Someone truly lost control right outside the front wooden door. But the illusion of a peaceful interaction shatters the moment you look down at the ground. Investigators found a pool of blood right there on the front porch. A struggle happened at the very threshold of her safe haven. Blood means violence, and violence means panic. The thing is, the forensic timeline gives us an even more chilling detail. Nancy had a pacemaker installed to keep her heart beating steadily. Modern pacemakers are incredible pieces of technology. They constantly transmit data via a wireless connection to a smartphone application. The authorities pulled the digital logs, and those logs tell a terrifying story. At exactly 2:28 in the morning, the application on her phone lost its connection to the pacemaker in her chest. This signal only has a short range. This exact minute marks the exact moment her body was carried away from her phone. He took her out into the cold desert darkness, but he left her smartphone sitting right there inside the house. And he did not just leave the phone behind, he left something much more important. He left all of her daily medication. Nancy was an 84-year-old woman with a serious cardiac condition. Her life literally depended on those prescription bottles sitting on her counter. Now, let us think about the psychology of a traditional ransom situation. If you are a criminal who wants to extort $2 million from a wealthy family, your hostage is your only leverage. Your hostage is your paycheck. Any kidnapper with half a brain knows that if they do not bring the heart medication, the hostage will die. If the hostage dies, there is no proof of life, and if there is no proof of life, nobody is going to pay you a single dime. Leaving that medication behind is the biggest mistake a professional could make, which leads me to believe this was never a professional operation at all. The fact that the medication was abandoned proves that whoever took her simply did not care if she lived or died. In fact, they probably already knew she was beyond saving. When you combine the discarded life-saving pills with the fresh blood found out on the porch, a very dark picture begins to form. We are likely looking at a botched fake kidnapping. Someone came to that house, and an altercation occurred right at the doorway. Maybe it was an argument that escalated, or maybe it was a deliberate physical assault. When an 84-year-old woman is pushed or shoved, the results are catastrophic. She likely hit the ground hard, causing the bleeding. Her fragile heart might have given out right then and there. Once she was dead on the porch, the perpetrator panicked. You cannot leave a body on the porch if you want to get away with it. So, the plan had to change instantly. The kidnapping was just a theatrical cover story, a desperate improvisation designed to get the corpse away from the property and explain why she was missing. They threw a mask on, disabled the cameras late, and dragged her away. They created a ghost story about a masked intruder to distract the police from the reality of a domestic homicide. It was all smoke and mirrors, meant to confuse the entire investigation. The evidence paints a picture of a tragic accident or a sudden burst of rage that ended terribly. A real kidnapper would never leave behind the one thing keeping their payday alive. Looking at the abandoned medication and the blood at the door, if you put yourself in the shoes of an investigator, do you believe this is a ransom kidnapping? Or is it a murder and body disposal? And then, after days of agonizing silence and wild speculation, the Federal Bureau of Investigation finally released a detailed physical description of the mysterious, masked figure caught on the security system. The man who walked up to the porch and severed the camera connection at exactly 1:47 in the morning was no longer just a blurry shadow in the darkness. The authorities had used digital forensics to measure his exact proportions against the doorframe of the house. They announced that the unknown suspect was a male, standing somewhere between 5 feet 9 inches and 5 feet 10 inches tall. He was further described as having a very average build, not overly muscular, but clearly capable of significant physical exertion. For a brief moment, this description felt almost too generic to be helpful. There are thousands of men residing in the state of Arizona who fit that exact height and weight profile. It initially seemed like a dead end for the detectives working to solve this baffling mystery. But then, the investigators dropped a crucial piece of information that changed the entire complexion of the case. They released a clear, enhanced image of the bag strapped to the suspect's shoulders. He was wearing a black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack. This is not a typical school bag or a standard briefcase used for commuting to an office. This is a highly specific piece of outdoor gear designed for navigating rough terrain and carrying heavy loads over long distances. It is the exact kind of backpack favored by people who spend their weekends trekking through the wilderness or climbing steep, rocky trails. Why would a random kidnapper choose a wilderness survival backpack to commit a crime in a wealthy residential neighborhood? That single piece of nylon canvas suddenly narrowed the suspect pool from any average man on the street to someone who was intimately familiar with the unforgiving outdoors. This is the part I could not get past. When you take that Federal Bureau of Investigation profile and hold it up next to Tommaso Cioni, the similarities become terrifying. Tommaso is an adult male who stands exactly within that 5 feet 9 inches to 5 feet 10 inches height range, possessing the exact same shoulder width and posture. His physical build matches the masked man in the surveillance video perfectly. Furthermore, Tommaso is a man who lives in the mountainous regions of Tucson. He is widely known to be an active individual who thoroughly understands the desert terrain surrounding the city. If someone desperately needed to make a body disappear in the vast, rocky expanse of the Arizona wilderness, a local hiker would know exactly where to go. They would know the hidden trails, the deep ravines, and the isolated places where law enforcement would never even think to look. And if the height, the average build, and the hiking backpack were not enough to make you pause, there is one more critical detail hidden within that footage. If you take the high-resolution still image provided by the authorities and zoom in closely on the suspect's face, you can see something underneath the dark ski mask. The fabric of the mask is stretched very tight across his facial features, and right above his upper lip, there is a distinct, dark shadow. It is the unmistakable outline of a thick mustache protruding just slightly against the material. Now, go look at any public photograph of Tommaso Cioni. He proudly wears a prominent, dark mustache on his face. The physical alignment is no longer just a passing resemblance. It is a mirror image captured in the dead of night. When you stack all of these puzzle pieces together, the resulting picture becomes incredibly difficult to ignore. We have a suspect who matches the exact height and average build of the son-in-law. We have a suspect carrying a specialized 25-liter hiking backpack, a perfect accessory for an outdoorsman living in the Tucson mountains. And we have the faint but undeniable outline of a mustache hidden beneath a winter ski mask. You have to ask yourself about the mathematics of chance. What are the odds that a random, violent stranger possessing all of these exact same physical traits just happened to target this specific house on this specific night? The height matches, the hiking backpack matches, the mustache matches. Do you think this is the unluckiest coincidence in the world? Or has the killer actually revealed himself? Meanwhile, if you turn on the television news during the first 2 weeks of this investigation, you will see a very specific narrative being pushed by the authorities. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos has been standing up at podiums, looking directly into the camera, and aggressively defending the family. He has publicly scolded independent journalists and news networks, calling their reporting reckless and demanding that they stop throwing baseless accusations at the daughter and son-in-law. To the average viewer watching at home, the message from law enforcement is crystal clear. Tommaso Cioni and his wife are grieving victims. They are completely cooperating with the investigation, and they are absolutely not considered suspects in this terrifying abduction. The sheriff is essentially acting as a human shield for the family, trying to control the public outrage and redirect attention back to the mysterious masked man with the hiking backpack. This public relations strategy is designed to project absolute unity between the detectives and the grieving relatives. It creates a powerful illusion that everyone is working together seamlessly to bring a missing grandmother home safely. But in the world of true crime, you must never listen to what the police say at a press conference. You must only look at what they actually do when the cameras are turned off. Let us look at the official search warrants filed in the local court. While the sheriff was busy protecting the reputation of Tommaso Cioni on national television, his own detectives were quietly standing in front of a judge, swearing under oath that they had probable cause to search that exact same family home. You do not get a judge to sign a search warrant just to ask a few routine questions. The detectives went into the residence and systematically confiscated their personal electronic devices. They took the cellular telephones, they took the computers, and they took the digital storage drives. They are looking for deleted text messages, hidden financial records, and hidden location data. They want to know exactly who Tommaso was talking to during those 4 missing hours. They want to trace every single digital step he took that night. And then came the most horrifying detail of the entire investigation so far. As the detectives were tearing through the house, they ordered a massive industrial pump truck to pull up right into the yard. They opened up the underground septic tank attached to the property and proceeded to completely drain and suck out every single drop of waste inside it. In other words, you do not pump a septic tank to find a living, breathing 84-year-old hostage. You do not look in a sewer for a kidnapping victim who is waiting to be rescued. You only do something that extreme and that disgusting because you are looking for things that someone desperately tried to flush away and destroy forever. You do that to find a murder weapon. You do that to find a shattered cellular telephone. You do that to find shredded clothing soaked in human blood. Or, most terrifyingly of all, you do that because you are looking for dismembered pieces of a human body hidden deep beneath the ground. This specific action crosses a massive line in any standard missing persons investigation. It shifts the entire focus from a frantic rescue mission into a grim recovery operation. This aggressive, invasive search completely betrays the comforting words the sheriff has been feeding to the public. You simply do not rip apart the plumbing infrastructure of a grieving family unless you secretly consider them your number one suspect. The authorities are playing a brilliant, high-stakes game of psychological warfare. They are smiling at the family through the television screen, lulling them into a false sense of security, while simultaneously tearing up their backyard looking for a corpse. It is a textbook investigative strategy designed to keep the prime suspects calm so they do not hire expensive defense attorneys and stop talking. The police know exactly who they are dealing with, and the empty septic tank proves it. They are letting the suspect believe he has outsmarted them, while they quietly gather the forensic evidence needed to lock him away forever. What do you think about this strategy? If you were watching the police pump your own septic tank while telling the world you are innocent, would you realize they are silently building a murder case against you? Let me know your thoughts down below now. The reason this matters is that every single person watching this case unfold is asking the exact same question. If the physical profile matches so perfectly, and if the timeline points so directly at the son-in-law, why is Tommaso Cioni not currently sitting in a jail cell wearing a pair of cold steel handcuffs? It is the most frustrating part of following a true crime investigation in real time. We see the puzzle pieces fitting together perfectly on our screens, and we expect the authorities to kick down a door immediately. But the reality of the justice system is much more complicated than our armchair detective work. Logical deduction, no matter how brilliant or convincing it might seem to the public, is absolutely not the same thing as undeniable physical evidence in a court of law. A prosecutor cannot walk into a courtroom and simply tell a jury that the suspect looks like the guy in the surveillance video. They need hard, irrefutable facts and proof. If the police arrest him too early based purely on suspicion and a matching backpack, a clever lawyer will create reasonable doubt, and a guilty man might walk free forever. They only get one shot at a murder trial, and they cannot afford to miss. And that is exactly why the police are maintaining this agonizing silence. They are not ignoring Tommaso. They are actively building a massive digital profile behind the scenes. We are currently living in an era where it is virtually impossible to commit a crime without leaving a trail of invisible electronic breadcrumbs. The detectives are fighting a digital war right now. They need to forensically examine the global positioning system history embedded deep inside the computer of Tommaso's vehicle. They need to know exactly where that car was located during that terrifying 4-hour gap between 9:50 in the evening and 1:47 in the morning. Did the engine turn on? Furthermore, they are ripping apart his cellular network data. They need to extract the cell tower triangulation logs to verify his alibi. If he claims he was sound asleep in his own bed at 1:47 in the morning, his telephone needs to confirm that it was stationary and connected to his home internet router, not bouncing off a tower located 3 miles away near Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood. Every single modern vehicle is essentially a computer on wheels, constantly recording speed, braking patterns, and exact coordinates. Did he connect his phone to the car Bluetooth interface during those missing hours? These invisible records do not lie, and they cannot be intimidated on the witness stand. At this point, I started questioning the entire pacing of the investigation, and then I remembered another major event in this case. Think about the arrest of Derek Colella, the scammer from California who tried to extort the family by pretending to be the kidnapper. The Federal Bureau of Investigation tracked him down and had him in federal custody almost instantly. That arrest happened so incredibly fast. What does that tell us? It proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that the federal agents have an absolute stranglehold on the digital bandwidth surrounding this case. They possess the technology and the authority to trace cellular data across state lines in a matter of hours. So, if they have that kind of lightning-fast capability, why are they being so painfully slow and silent when it comes to the local family members? The answer is both brilliant and terrifying. If they are staying silent about Tommaso, it means they are not just looking for a single text message. They are waiting for the forensic analysis of a colossal mountain of data. We are talking about terabytes of information pulled from internet service providers, vehicle telematics, and encrypted applications. Processing that level of digital evidence properly so that it holds up against a defense attorney can take months, or sometimes even a full year. They are casting a massive net, looking for the smallest anomaly. A deleted internet search about how to dispose of a body, a burner phone purchased weeks in advance, or a sudden, unexplained financial transaction. They are patiently building a digital cage so tight that when they finally spring the trap, neither he nor any potential accomplice will have any room left to lie. They want the suspect to feel that invisible net tightening around them every single day until the digital footprint forces a confession. Which tells us we are standing right on the edge of the absolute worst-case scenario imaginable. We have a very clear financial motive tied directly to a massive $2 million estate. We have a terrifying and completely unexplained 4-hour time gap where the house sat completely silent in the freezing cold. We have a physical crime scene that looks exactly like a clumsy, horribly botched stage play deliberately designed to distract the professional investigators from the real, hidden truth. And above all else, we have a prime suspect caught on camera wearing a specialized hiker backpack, possessing facial and physical features that perfectly match the son-in-law. Everything points inward, not outward. When I piece this entire sequence of events together, I realize the police are not actually stuck at a dead end at all. They are simply, meticulously setting elaborate legal traps all around the suspect. They know that time is the ultimate enemy of a guilty conscience. Every single day that passes without an official arrest is a long, agonizing day the perpetrator wakes up terrified, wondering if today is the exact day the federal agents finally knock on the front door. The authorities are strategically letting the intense pressure build, allowing the paranoid suspect to make careless mistakes, to whisper to an accomplice in secret, or to nervously check a digital device one too many times. The total silence from the local sheriff is a brilliantly calculated psychological weapon. It intentionally lulls the guilty party into a false sense of absolute security while the invisible digital net tightens around them. The detectives do not need a rushed confession right now. They patiently need a mountain of undeniable data. They need the cellular tower pings, the global positioning system coordinates extracted from the car, and the hidden internet search history. They are quietly building an impenetrable fortress of electronic evidence that no expensive defense attorney could ever tear down. When you look at the entire investigative board, from the fresh blood on the porch to the completely drained septic tank, you can clearly see the invisible walls slowly closing in on the person who committed this terrible act. This case leaves us with a truly chilling lesson about blind trust, domestic deception, and personal safety. We spend our entire lives diligently locking our doors and religiously checking our security alarms to protect ourselves from the unknown boogeymen outside. We are taught from childhood to deeply fear the violent stranger lurking in the dark alleyway or the random, opportunistic predator stalking the quiet neighborhood. But sometimes, the most profound and deadly threat does not come from a faceless stranger roaming the streets at midnight. Sometimes, the ultimate, inescapable danger is already sitting right there inside your own house. It hides right at the family dinner table, perfectly concealed behind the comforting illusion of filial piety and peaceful, loving domestic dinners. It is a terrifying, stomach-churning realization that the gentle hands passing you a warm plate of food could be the exact same hands coldly calculating the exact cash value of your life insurance policy. If the desert body disposal theory is completely correct, and the cold-blooded killer truly dragged an 84-year-old woman into the unforgiving wilderness, which specific piece of digital evidence do you genuinely think will be the final straw that absolutely forces the killer to confess? Will it be the vehicle location data definitively proving the car drove out into the rocky wasteland? Will it be a deleted internet search history showing someone desperately looking for clever ways to permanently cover up a domestic homicide? Or will it be the cell phone records showing a fatal connection to the wrong tower at the exact wrong time? Let us discuss this together down in the comment section below. I genuinely want to carefully read your personal theories on exactly what specific, careless mistake will ultimately bring this entire house of cards violently crashing down. We are all patiently waiting for the final shoe to drop. Maybe in a few short weeks, a devastating grand jury indictment will finally be officially released to the general public, bringing the long-awaited justice that this deeply grieving family truly deserves. Or maybe the harsh reality is far more depressing. Maybe the vast, completely barren Arizona desert will simply swallow this dark truth forever, burying the terrible secrets beneath miles of sun, baked sand, and silent stones. We might never know the exact sequence of events that suddenly ended the long life of Nancy Guthrie on that freezing January night. But as we nervously look at the smiling family portraits and then back at the grainy surveillance video, we are left with one haunting question. In the end, who is wearing the mask? Thank you for joining me on this journey to the very end of this mystery case. If you enjoy analyzing the hidden aspects of these cases, please like and subscribe to the channel. See you on the next investigation journey. Bye!
Returning to our top story this evening in the ongoing search for Nancy Guthrie, the Pima County Sheriff's Department says the suspect's clothes may have been purchased from Walmart, but they're not exclusively available at that store.
Right now, Savannah Guthrie shares a new message for hope as a piece of evidence found near the scene of her mother's disappearance could provide some answers.
Ashley Banfield, who hosts her own podcast called Drop Dead Serious, is breaking exclusives on this case like nobody's business. And yesterday, she had quite a doozy.
When Nancy Guthrie disappeared into the dark night, the world was quickly told a simple story of a high-profile kidnapping. We were supposed to believe a ruthless criminal mastermind snatched an innocent, elderly woman for millions of dollars in ransom. The thing is, when you actually look at the evidence, the official narrative completely falls apart. I have spent weeks poring over police records, forensic reports, and court documents, and I found exactly 5 shocking details that simply do not add up. If this was truly a kidnapping, why would an intruder waste 40 minutes inside her home? Why would the suspect put on a bizarre, performative show for the security camera? And why would the ransom demands be blasted to the media instead of reaching her family? None of it makes any logical sense. What I discovered is a chilling puzzle of broken truths and extremely dangerous lies. So, let us start with the very beginning of this nightmare, the night of January 31st. It was supposed to be a completely normal evening. Nancy Guthrie, an 84-year-old woman, had just spent some quality time with her daughter Annie and her son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni. At 9:48 in the evening, Tommaso drives his mother-in-law back to her house. We know this precise detail because of the official police timeline released later to the public. He drops her off, and exactly 2 minutes later, at 9:50 in the evening, the garage door of Nancy's home closes tight. The street goes completely quiet, and just like that, Tommaso Cioni becomes the very last known person to ever see Nancy Guthrie alive, other than whoever took her into the dark. In any missing person investigation, the police always look at the husband, the wife, or the person who saw the victim last. It is standard procedure. We all know that from watching true crime television shows. However, what unfolded over the next few days went way beyond just asking a few routine questions. The investigative spotlight suddenly shifted aggressively toward the son-in-law. What happened next? The Pima County Sheriff's Department descended on Tommaso's house. And they did not just show up to knock on the front door and have a polite, casual chat in the living room. They executed a full-blown search warrant on February 5th. The media and the amateur internet sleuths went absolutely crazy over this development. People started pulling up photographs of Tommaso, analyzing his face, and immediately pointing out that he had a mustache. Then, they took that blurry, grainy footage of the masked man from Nancy's doorbell security camera and started doing intense side-by-side comparisons. They whispered constantly about the height, the physical build, and the facial hair. The internet was practically ready to convict him right then, and they're based on absolutely nothing but pure speculation. Then came February 7th, and things escalated to a whole new level. Law enforcement returned to Tommaso's home for a second search. This time, it was an intense, highly visible operation that lasted a long while. Deputies were seen walking around wearing blue medical gloves, making sure they did not accidentally contaminate whatever they were touching or examining. They stayed inside that house for several agonizing hours. They took dozens of photographs of the property. And when they finally walked out, They were not empty-handed. They carried out brown paper evidence bags and, most notably, a specialized silver briefcase. If you know anything about modern investigations, you know that those heavy silver briefcases are almost always used by cybercrime units to securely transport digital evidence, like hard drives, laptops, or cell phones. At this point, I started questioning why the police were putting on such a massive, public display. If you are just crossing names off a suspect list, you do not usually spend hours in a house with medical gloves and silver briefcases while the local news media watches from the sidewalk. It really looked like they were closing in on him and building an airtight case against the family. But on February 16th, the sheriff released a public statement that felt like a bucket of ice water thrown over the entire internet rumor mill. He categorically and officially cleared Tommaso Cioni and all the other siblings and spouses as possible suspects in this horrific crime. He called the family victims, plain and simple. He even begged the media to honor their profession, report with some sense of compassion, and stop spreading the cruel, baseless rumors. So why did they tear his house apart? Why the blue latex gloves? Why the digital evidence extraction? The answer actually lies deep in the legal playbook, specifically a famous 1995 United States Supreme Court case called Kiles versus Whitley. You see, the law says that a criminal defense attorney always has the constitutional right to argue that the police conducted a flawed or incomplete investigation. If law enforcement eventually catches the real kidnapper, that kidnapper's highly paid lawyer will stand up in court and confidently point the finger straight at Tommaso. They will say the police were incredibly lazy, that they ignored the family member who was the absolute last person to see her alive, and that they fixated on the wrong guy entirely. By tearing Tommaso's life apart, searching his home twice, and seizing his digital devices, the police were actually building a defensive fortress around their future prosecution case. They can now sit on the witness stand one day, look at the jury, and confidently say they looked at the family exhaustively, and the family had absolutely nothing to do with it. They had to investigate him fiercely and publicly to completely eliminate him from the narrative. Looking closely at those heavy silver evidence briefcases being carried out of the son-in-law's house, do you think this was truly just a necessary legal formality to build a tight case? Or did the police actually suspect something else in those early days? And then we turn our attention to the cold, hard data. In modern criminal investigations, digital footprints are often louder than physical ones. We have the official timeline constructed by the Pima County Sheriff's Department, and on the surface, it looks like a standard sequence of events. But when you actually lay the timestamps side by side, a massive, unexplained void opens up in the middle of the night. It starts at exactly 1:47 in the morning. This is the moment the doorbell camera at Nancy Guthrie's residence goes dark. The intruder, the person we see in that grainy footage, physically disconnects the device. This is a deliberate action. It signals the beginning of the crime. At this precise second, the digital eyes on the house are blinded. Logic tells us that this is when the break-in occurs. The suspect is now free to enter the home unseen. The problem is, the digital trail does not end there. Inside the house, Nancy Guthrie's life was monitored by technology. She wore a pacemaker, a device essential for keeping her heart beating in rhythm. This pacemaker was connected via Bluetooth to an application on her smartphone, which she kept on her nightstand or nearby. As long as Nancy and her heart were within range of that phone, the connection remained active. According to the forensic analysis of her phone, that Bluetooth connection was not severed immediately. In a typical kidnapping scenario, you would expect the intruder to breach the door at 1:47, grab the victim, and drag them out to a waiting vehicle within minutes. Speed is survival. Every second spent inside a target's home increases the chance of a neighbor waking up, a dog barking, or a silent alarm triggering. But that is not what happened here. The pacemaker app did not disconnect from the phone until 2:28 in the morning. Let us pause and really think about that gap. From 1:47, when the camera was cut, to 2:28, when Nancy was removed from the range of her phone. That is a difference of 41 minutes. Which means the intruder was inside that house with an 84-year-old woman for over 40 minutes. 40 minutes is an eternity in a criminal timeline. In the high-stakes world of abduction, where adrenaline is pumping and the risk of capture is at its absolute peak, 5 minutes feels like an hour. But 40 minutes, that is not a snatch and grab operation. That is a visit. That is enough time to cook a meal, watch a sitcom episode, or thoroughly search every single room in the house. Why would a kidnapper, whose sole objective is to secure a hostage for ransom, linger in the danger zone for that long? Nancy Guthrie was frail. She had mobility issues. She was not a target who could put up a 40-minute physical fight that would delay an attacker. She could have been subdued and removed in less than 5 minutes. So, what was happening during that long stretch of silence? Was the intruder waiting for something? Were they looking for something specific other than Nancy? Or, and this is the darker possibility, did the plan go wrong immediately? And did the intruder spend those 40 minutes trying to figure out what to do next? This timeline discrepancy completely breaks the logic of a professional, calculated kidnapping. Professional kidnappers do not hang around. They do not loiter at the crime scene. They get in, they get the asset, and they get out. The fact that this person stayed inside for nearly 3/4 of an hour suggests that their priority was not speed. It suggests that leaving immediately was not part of the plan, or perhaps that the situation inside the house had become much more complicated than a simple abduction. When you look at a crime scene timeline, the gaps are often where the truth hides. We have a camera cut at 1:47. We have a pacemaker disconnect at 2:28, and in between, we have 40 minutes of absolute darkness where nobody knows what was said, what was done, or why they stayed so long. For a case that is supposed to be a high-stakes extraction of a wealthy target, this behavior is sloppy, risky, and confusing. It defies the basic survival instincts of a criminal. In a situation involving the abduction of an 84-year-old woman, do you honestly believe a kidnapper would willingly stay at the crime scene for over 40 minutes? Or does that suggest to you that he was busy doing something else entirely? Meanwhile, deep inside the digital forensics lab, the Federal Bureau of Investigation was busy dissecting the only visual evidence they had. They were breaking down the doorbell camera footage frame by frame, looking for a clue, a scar, a tattoo, anything that could identify the man who took Nancy Guthrie. But as the profilers and behavioral analysts watched the video over and over again, the mood in the room shifted. They stopped looking for a criminal mastermind and started realizing they were watching something else entirely. What they were seeing looked less like a high-stakes felony and more like a poorly directed community theater play. The visual evidence was confusing from the very first second. Let us talk about the costume, because that is exactly what it looks like. The suspect is wearing an absurd amount of clothing. He is bulky, over-encumbered, and stiff. The report notes that he appears to be wearing layers of thick clothing that would make moving quickly or quietly almost impossible. He is wearing a mask, which is standard, but looking closely, it appears he is wearing 2 masks, one layered over the other. And the hands. He is wearing 2 pairs of gloves. Now, think about the dexterity you need to disconnect a camera, pick a lock, or subdue a human being. Wearing 2 pairs of gloves destroys your sense of touch. It makes you clumsy. It makes you fumble. A professional thief or a kidnapper needs their hands to be precise tools. This person had turned his hands into paws. It was as if the person behind the mask was terrified of leaving a single microscopic skin cell behind, to the point of making themselves ineffective. Then there is the weapon. This detail alone drove the internet sleuths and the firearms experts absolutely crazy. The man has a handgun tucked into the front of his waistband, right in the center. In the tactical world, they call this the appendix carry position. But the way this man does it is all wrong. It is not secured in a holster. It is just shoved down the front of his pants, sticking out at a dangerous, awkward angle. It is incredibly loose. If he had to run, jump a fence, or even bend over quickly, that gun would likely fall out or slide down his pant leg. It is a position that screams amateur. It is positioned there not for accessibility, but for visibility. It feels like he placed it there specifically so the camera would see it and register him as armed and dangerous. And this is important, because his behavior before he cuts the feed is even stranger. Before he reaches for the camera to disconnect it, he pauses. He does not rush to the door. He does not scan the perimeter for witnesses. Instead, he starts messing with the landscaping. He literally bends down and starts pulling at the bushes and weeds near the entryway. He rips a few plants out of the ground in a very exaggerated, dramatic fashion. Why? Why would a kidnapper waste precious seconds gardening in the middle of a crime? It creates noise. It leaves unnecessary physical evidence. It keeps him in the light of the porch for longer than necessary. And then, he does the one thing a criminal should never do. He looks up. Most criminals will keep their heads down, using the brim of a hat or a hood to shield their face from the lens angle. This man does the opposite. He tilts his head back. He looks directly into the lens of the doorbell camera. He lingers there for a split second, almost as if he is posing. He wants to be seen. He wants the camera to capture the mask, the bulk, the gun, and the gloves. What struck me here was the sheer performative nature of his movements. When you watch a predator, a lion stalking a gazelle, or a thief casing a house, their movements are fluid, efficient, and minimized. They want to be a ghost. This man was not trying to be a ghost. He was trying to be a monster. His movements were jerky, loud, and deliberate. It felt like he was checking boxes on a list. Show the gun, show the mask, show the aggression. It did not look like a man trying to sneak into a house to steal a person. It looked like a man trying to ensure that the police had a very specific, scary video to show the public on the evening news. If he knew where the camera was, why not approach from the side? Why not spray paint the lens before stepping into the frame? Why stand there, pull weeds, and pose with a gun that is about to fall out of your pants? The only logical conclusion is that the video itself was the point. The footage was not a mistake, it was a production. And, if the kidnapping was a production, then we have to ask ourselves, who wrote the script and why is the acting so incredibly bad? The FBI profilers saw it, and now we see it too. This was not just a crime scene, it was a stage. Because of that, the public narrative was set in stone almost immediately. The video was terrifying, the suspect looked like a monster, and the community was paralyzed with fear. People believed, without a shadow of a doubt, that Nancy Guthrie had been snatched by a professional crew. And, to back up that terrifying belief, there was indeed a ransom demand. It was not a small amount. We are talking about a demand for millions of dollars, to be paid exclusively in Bitcoin. On the surface, this checks every single box of a Hollywood thriller. You have the victim, the villain, and the price tag. But when you stop looking at the headlines and start looking at the logistics of the demand itself, the logic begins to crumble. The reason this matters is the method of delivery. In almost every successful kidnapping for ransom in the history of crime, the perpetrators follow a very strict, very specific playbook. Rule number 1 is silence. You contact the family directly. You use a burner phone or an encrypted messaging app. You whisper into the phone, "Do not call the police." And, "Do not tell the media." You want the transaction to happen in the shadows because the moment the light shines on the deal, the money disappears. However, the individuals behind the Nancy Guthrie ransom demands did the exact opposite. They did not whisper, they screamed. They did not send a private courier to the family home. Instead, they sent emails directly to news organizations. They contacted local television stations like KOLD and even reached out to massive national celebrity gossip outlets like TMZ. They deliberately, intentionally, and aggressively blew this story up. They wanted the entire world to know that they had her, and they wanted the entire world to know exactly how much money they wanted. This is a catastrophic tactical error for anyone who actually wants to get paid. In the criminal underworld, involving the media is the equivalent of setting your getaway car on fire before you even rob the bank. By emailing the press, they guaranteed that the Federal Bureau of Investigation would be involved within minutes. They guaranteed that every single movement of the Guthrie family would be watched by federal agents. They guaranteed that any attempt to transfer millions of dollars in cryptocurrency would be tracked by the most sophisticated cyber division on the planet. Why would a criminal enterprise, supposedly sophisticated enough to pull off a heist without leaving DNA, make a mistake that a teenager would avoid? It turns the ransom demand into a public spectacle rather than a private transaction. It suggests that the goal was never the money. The goal was the chaos. The goal was the noise. And there is something even more disturbing than the method of delivery. It is what was missing from the message. In the business of kidnapping, and make no mistake, it is a business. The hostage is a commodity. You have to prove that your product is intact. You send a photograph of the victim holding a current newspaper. You send a voice recording of them answering a specific question about the weather or the news. This is called proof of life. Without it, no negotiator in the world will authorize a payment of even $1. In the case of Nancy Guthrie, the ransom demands contained absolutely zero proof of life. There was no photo. There was no audio. There was no video. There was nothing to prove that Nancy was even in their custody, let alone that she was still breathing. The family was asked to send millions of dollars into a black hole based on nothing but an anonymous email sent to a gossip website. This silence is deafening. If they had her, and she was alive, taking a picture is the easiest part of the crime. It takes 5 seconds. The fact that they could not, or would not, produce this evidence leads us to a terrifying conclusion. Either they never had her in the first place, and this was a cruel hoax by opportunists reading the news, or they did take her, but she was already gone before the ransom note was even written. When you combine the public broadcasting of the crime with the total lack of proof, the kidnapping for ransom theory feels less like a motive and more like a distraction. It feels like someone trying to buy time. If you put yourself in the shoes of a kidnapper who desperately wants to get paid quickly and quietly, would you choose to scream your demands to the entire world and make the handover of cash an impossible mission? At the same time, we have to force ourselves to look away from the digital noise and focus on the cold, hard physical reality of the crime scene itself. The police confirmed early on that they found blood near the entryway of Nancy Guthrie's home. This is a terrifying detail, but when you analyze it through the lens of a kidnapping, it becomes a massive contradiction. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She was not a linebacker. She was not a soldier. She was a frail, elderly woman who reportedly had significant difficulty walking and getting around. If a professional team, or even a single strong man, wanted to abduct her, the physical mismatch is overwhelming. There would be absolutely no need for violence severe enough to draw blood. You could simply pick her up. You could guide her out the door. The presence of blood at the very threshold of the house suggests that something went wrong immediately. It suggests a struggle, a fall, or a sudden injury that was not part of a smooth extraction plan. A professional kidnapper knows that a bleeding hostage is a liability. A bleeding hostage leaves DNA everywhere. A bleeding hostage might go into shock and die before you get them to the safe house. The blood on the floor is the first sign that this was not a controlled operation, it was a disaster. What I found was that when you consult the official statistics from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the profile of this crime becomes even more impossible to believe. Kidnapping for ransom is a calculated business model. You target someone who can pay, yes, but you also target someone who can survive the ordeal long enough for the negotiation to finish. Statistically speaking, the number of ransom kidnappings in the United States involving a victim over the age of 80 is virtually zero. It is a statistical ghost. It almost never happens. Why? Because the risk is astronomically high. An 84-year-old victim is a ticking clock. The stress alone could kill them. The lack of comfort could kill them. For a criminal looking for a payday, an elderly victim is the worst possible investment. They are too fragile. The odds of them dying in custody before the money is transferred are nearly 100%. Criminals know this. They target healthy adults or children, people who can survive a week in a trunk or a basement. They do not target grandmothers with heart conditions. And this brings us to the cruelest, most damning piece of evidence in the entire case. The one detail that shatters the kidnapping theory into a million pieces. When the police searched the home, they found Nancy's heart medication sitting right there. It was left behind. We know Nancy had a pacemaker. We know she required specific, daily medication to regulate her heart function. Without this medicine, her health would deteriorate rapidly. It was not a vitamin, it was a lifeline. If you are a kidnapper, and you have done even 1 minute of research on your target, you know she is sick. You know she needs those pills. If your goal is to trade her life for millions of dollars, her life is the most valuable thing in the world to you. You are her protector. You need her breathing. You need her speaking. You need her alive to prove to the family that she is worth paying for. A rational kidnapper would have swept that medicine cabinet clean. They would have grabbed every bottle, every prescription, every pill they could find to ensure their assets stayed alive. But they did not. They left the medicine on the counter. By leaving those pills, the intruder made a silent, deadly statement. They were essentially deciding that Nancy did not need to survive the next 24 or 48 hours. No kidnapper who expects a payout would make that mistake. It would be like stealing a car to sell it, but draining all the oil out of the engine before you drive away. It guarantees the product will be worthless by the time you try to sell it. This is the part I couldn't get past. If the people who took her did not care enough to bring the one thing that would keep her alive, then we have to stop pretending they wanted to keep her alive at all. And if they did not care if she lived or died from the very moment they took her, then the motive was never ransom. The motive was never money. So, what was the real purpose of removing a dying woman from her home in the middle of the night? In other words, when we step back and look at the entire mosaic of evidence we have gathered so far, we are left with a picture that is fundamentally broken. We have an intruder who seems more interested in performing for a camera than committing a stealthy crime. We have an inexplicable time gap of 40 minutes where the suspect lingered inside the home instead of fleeing with his prize. We have the chilling decision to leave behind the heart medication that was the only thing keeping the victim alive. And finally, we have a group of extortionists who seem desperate to be famous on the evening news, but completely unable to provide a single shred of proof that they actually have the woman they claim to have taken. When you stack these facts on top of each other, the weight of the contradictions becomes impossible to ignore. A kidnapper who wants money does not act this way. A professional crew does not act this way. Even a desperate amateur usually has enough common sense to bring the medicine and keep the police out of it. The official story is trying to force a square peg into a round hole, and it just does not fit, which tells us that the kidnapping for ransom narrative is likely just a fragile mask hiding a much uglier truth. Criminal profilers and seasoned homicide detectives often talk about the concept of staging. Staging happens when a perpetrator alters a crime scene to mislead the authorities. They try to make a personal murder look like a random burglary, or a domestic incident look like a stranger abduction. When the physical evidence does not match the supposed motive, you are almost certainly looking at a staged event. The experts looking at the Nancy Guthrie case are now beginning to lean heavily toward a different, darker hypothesis. The prevailing theory among the skeptics is that this was never a kidnapping at all. One possibility is a burglary gone wrong. Imagine a thief targeting a wealthy home in the foothills, expecting the house to be empty or the elderly occupant to be asleep. But perhaps Nancy woke up. Perhaps she confronted him. We know there was blood at the entryway. That suggests a physical altercation occurred right there at the door. If the intruder panicked and struck her, or if she fell and was critically injured, the burglary suddenly turns into a potential homicide. In that moment of panic, the intruder is stuck. He has a body, or a dying woman, on his hands. He cannot just leave her there because her body is evidence. It connects him to the scene. This is where the 40 minutes come into play. Those 40 minutes were not spent waiting. They were spent problem solving. They were spent cleaning up. They were spent formulating a plan B. If he leaves her there, it is a murder investigation starting the next morning. But if he takes her with him, if he removes her from the property entirely, then it becomes a missing person case. It becomes a mystery. It buys him time. This theory explains why the medicine was left behind. He did not take the pills because he knew she would never need them again. It explains the theatrical behavior at the doorbell camera. If he realizes he needs to cover up a death, he might decide to play the role of the scary kidnapper. To sell the lie, he shows the gun. He acts the part. He creates a character for the police to chase so they do not start looking for a killer. The ransom demands sent to the media fit perfectly into this deception. They are smoke bombs. By demanding millions of dollars in Bitcoin through public channels, the perpetrators keep the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the family focused on the hope of a transaction. They keep everyone looking for a live hostage in a basement somewhere, negotiating prices and waiting for emails. It distracts the world from the grim reality that this might actually be a recovery mission for a body that was disposed of that very first night. The kidnapping is the story they want us to believe because the truth is likely far simpler and far more tragic. It was a crime of opportunity that spiraled into violence, followed by a clumsy, desperate attempt to cover it up. So, I have to ask you to really look at this. Connect the dots yourself. From the bad acting on the porch to the blood on the floor to the impossible silence from the so-called kidnappers. When you look at all of these broken pieces together, do you still honestly believe that this is a kidnapping for ransom, or do you think we are looking at a murder disguised as a mystery? From there, as I sat back and looked at the sprawling, chaotic map of this investigation, I realized something truly terrifying. When we start digging into a mystery like this, we usually expect to find a lack of evidence. We expect a clean crime scene, wiped surfaces, and a ghost who vanished without a trace. But in the case of Nancy Guthrie, we found the exact opposite. We found a mountain of evidence. We found too much evidence. And that is when the cold reality hit me. I realize that we have been looking at this entire situation through the wrong lens. We tend to think that a perfect crime is one where the criminal leaves nothing behind. We imagine a sterile room where even the dust has been swept away. But what if the perfect crime is actually a crime where the perpetrator throws so much garbage at the investigators that they cannot find the one thing that actually matters? This case is a masterclass in distraction. Think about the sheer volume of clues we have been forced to analyze. We have a masked man performing a bizarre pantomime for a doorbell camera, making sure we see his gun and his layers of clothing. We have ransom demands that were not whispered in secret, but screamed to the global media in a way that guaranteed no money would ever change hands. We have a pair of bloody gloves found 2 miles away that do not match the DNA profile of the scene, yet they consume days of police resources. These are not mistakes. These are breadcrumbs leading to nowhere. They were created to make us look in 1,000 different directions at once. They were designed to make us argue about Bitcoin wallets and mustache shapes on Reddit threads, while the real truth slipped away unnoticed. The perpetrators created a loud, chaotic spectacle to cover up a silent, brutal reality. They want us looking at the clown in the mask so that we do not look at the shadow in the corner. The disappearance of Nancy Guthrie remains an open, bleeding wound for the people of Pima County. It is a tragedy that has left a family shattered and a community living in fear. I have done my best to take you through the fragments of the police files, the contradictions in the timeline, and the bizarre theatricality of the evidence. I have shared my perspective on why the pieces of this puzzle do not fit the picture on the box. But now, I want to turn the investigation over to you. I want to hear your voice in this conversation. After walking through the timeline, analyzing the behavior of the intruder, and seeing the impossibility of the ransom demands, what is your conclusion? Do you believe the official story that a team of kidnappers targeted an 84-year-old woman for cryptocurrency? Do you believe it was a burglary that went tragically wrong, leading to a panicked cover-up? Or do you see something even more sinister in the way the scene was staged? Which theory actually carries the weight of the truth for you? I want you to share your thoughts, your theories, and your questions. Because sometimes, it is the fresh pair of eyes that spots the detail everyone else missed. Ultimately, we have to accept that the truth is rarely as loud as those frantic email demands sent to the news stations. The truth does not usually scream for attention. The truth is usually quiet. It is patient. It sits in the background, waiting for the noise to die down. The truth of this case is as silent as that inexplicable gap in the timeline on the night of January 31st. That 40-minute void is the black hole at the center of everything. It is the time between the camera going dark and the heart monitor disconnecting. It is 40 minutes of secrets, 40 minutes where the world stopped watching. The final question we have to ask ourselves is not about the money or the emails or the gloves. The question is simply this: who was the person who took advantage of those 40 minutes of darkness? And when they finally walked out of that garage, what else did they take with them? Besides the fragile life of an 84-year-old woman, thank you for joining me on this difficult investigation. Your attention matters because it keeps the pressure on for answers. If you appreciate this deep dive, please like and subscribe to support the channel. I read every single comment, so tell me your theory below. Stay safe, and I will see you soon.
Reverb Nation, that's a music website, says that he put out an album with a 3-man music group called Early Black. Music is apparently available. Investigation says that Tommaso Cioni, Annie P. Guthrie's husband, may be the prime suspect in this case.
The police have been constantly telling us that the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie is merely a simple case of a random lone stranger suddenly committing a terrifying kidnapping in the middle of the dark night. But the latest forensic reports have just shattered that entire false theory completely. Investigators have officially confirmed that there are two separate DNA profiles directly connected to the crime scene. One crime, two distinct perpetrators. This shocking detail changes absolutely everything we thought we knew. What if the actual mastermind never even stepped onto the front porch that night, but instead handed the dangerous physical execution of the job to his best friend of 19 years, a man with an established criminal record for burglary and robbery? Are the son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, and the rock band drummer, Dominic Evans, the real duo secretly operating behind the dark mask of this mysterious case? Everything I am about to share with you right now is strictly based on weeks of deeply digging through serious court filings, official FBI descriptions, local property records, and factual forensic data. I did not just read the daily headlines. I closely looked at the 19-year connection they are completely avoiding talking about. Let us go back to the night of January 31st. It was a normal family dinner at Annie and Tommaso Cioni's house. At roughly 9:50 in the evening, Tommaso reportedly drove his mother-in-law, Nancy Guthrie, back to her home. He says he made sure she was safely inside. So, we have a specific drop-off time, 9:50 in the evening. But the timeline gets extremely dark after that. The Nest doorbell camera at Nancy's house was manually disconnected at 1:47 in the morning. What happened next, or rather, what happened in between those two timestamps, is the most crucial part of this entire investigation. From 9:50 in the evening to 1:47 in the morning, there is a massive window of nearly 4 hours. 4 hours is an absolute eternity in a criminal investigation. It is more than enough time to drive home, wait for your neighborhood to fall completely asleep, change clothes, drive back to the target location, park safely, and execute a plan. And right now, there is absolutely no publicly confirmed alibi for Tommaso Cioni during those critical 4 hours. When you watch the footage of the masked intruder approaching the porch, you do not see a panicked amateur. You see what behavioral experts call ownership behavior. This person walked with complete confidence in the dark. He knew exactly where the blind spots were. He knew exactly where the camera was positioned. More importantly, he knew that the camera system did not have an active, paid cloud storage subscription. You do not learn that from a quick internet search. You learn that by being inside the house frequently, by helping set the security system up, or by being part of the family. And then you examine the financial and legal moves made before the crime. Exactly 8 months before Nancy disappeared, Tommaso signed a durable power of attorney, handing over complete control of his financial and personal affairs to his wife. While real estate experts say this can be a standard move, doing it 8 months before your wealthy mother-in-law is abducted for a $6 million ransom feels like heavily calculated preparation. It feels like the precise work of a mastermind architect getting his affairs in order just in case he needs to vanish or faces severe legal trouble. But here is the specific detail that truly broke this case wide open for me. In the desert, homes like Nancy's always have heavy iron security gates sitting right in front of the main wooden doors. In the released doorbell footage, the suspect does not pry the gate open. He does not use heavy bolt cutters. He does not aggressively kick it down. He simply walks right through it smoothly, as if it were already sitting wide open waiting for him. How does a random stranger get through a locked iron security gate without making a single sound? They simply do not do that in the real world. Someone must have intentionally left it unlocked. Someone who was physically at the house just 4 hours earlier. Did Tommaso Cioni intentionally leave that outer gate completely unsecured to perfectly clear a silent path for the operative arriving at 1:47 in the morning? The police cleared the family almost immediately, But look at the clear facts. An unforced security gate and a 4-hour gap with absolutely zero alibi. If your mother-in-law vanished and you were the last to see her, would you feel cleared, just because the sheriff said so to the press? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments section. We have established the architect. We have looked at the 4-hour window, the unforced gate, the suspicious financial moves, and the intimate knowledge of the security cameras. It all points heavily toward the son-in-law plotting the entire thing. The problem is, when you look closely at the physical evidence, the theory of him acting completely alone hits a massive brick wall. This is the part I couldn't get past. The math just didn't work. The Federal Bureau of Investigation released a highly specific physical profile of the masked suspect captured on the doorbell camera. They stated clearly that the man on the porch stands somewhere between 5 feet 9 inches and 5 feet 10 inches tall. If you look at any public photograph of Tommaso Cioni standing next to his family members or other people, it is glaringly obvious that he is significantly taller than 5 feet 10 inches. He does not fit the physical description provided by the federal agents. That height discrepancy is a fatal flaw in the single perpetrator theory. Tommaso simply cannot be the guy physically standing on that porch. If he is too tall to be the operative, then the entire theory falls apart, right? Well, not exactly. It only falls apart if you believe he executed the plan by himself. But what if the architect needed an operative? What if he needed someone he could trust absolutely implicitly to do the dirty physical work in the dark? If you need someone for a high-stakes job like this, you do not just hire a random stranger off the street. You look for someone in your inner circle. You look for loyalty. Meanwhile, let us take a trip back in time to April of 2007. An ordinary classified advertisement was posted on Craigslist in the local area. Tommaso, who had recently moved to the United States, answered that advertisement. That is when he met a local drummer named Dominic Evans. They clicked musically and decided to form an independent rock band together. They called their band Early Black. From that very simple internet meeting, a profound bond was formed. By the time Nancy Guthrie was taken from her home in January of 2026, Tommaso and Dominic had been close friends for 19 years. 19 years is not just a casual friendship. That is nearly 2 decades of shared history. 19 years is more than enough time to learn every single intimate detail about your best friend's life. Dominic would have known all about Tommaso's wealthy mother-in-law. He would have heard all the complaints, all the stories, and all the financial details about the Guthrie family. He would know exactly where Nancy lived, what her routines were, and what the layout of the house looked like. When you spend that much time creating music and hanging out together, you share a mindset. And speaking of the music they created together, there is one particular detail from their past that stopped me dead in my tracks when I found it. After years of rehearsing and playing local venues, Early Black finally released their debut studio album. The title they chose for that specific record is something we need to talk about right now. They named their debut album Life, Love, Love, Murder. I know it's just an indie band album title, but seeing it now, in 2026, does that send a chill down your spine? Tell me what you think. When you take a step back and look at the bigger picture, the puzzle pieces start snapping together in a way that is incredibly hard to ignore. The architect designs the flawless plan, disables the digital security, and perfectly leaves the heavy iron gate unlocked. Then, the operative, a trusted friend of 19 years, who actually fits the federal physical description of 5 feet 9 inches, steps up to the porch to finish the job. The fatal flaw of the height discrepancy actually ends up pointing us directly toward the existence of a perfectly coordinated two-man team. If Tommaso had been the right height, the police might have focused solely on him from the very beginning. But because he was physically excluded by the video evidence. The authorities had to widen their search parameters. They had to look for a completely different person. They never expected that the mastermind would outsource the most dangerous part of the entire operation to his very closest and oldest friend. If Tommaso is the architect who carefully built the master plan, Dominic Evans is the perfect operative who flawlessly executed it. To truly understand why a respected science teacher would recruit an independent drummer for a massive kidnapping, we need to look past the music they played together and dig deeply into the official court records of Pima County. When you pull the completely public files on Dominic Evans, you do not just find minor traffic tickets, small fines, or petty offenses. You find a highly documented history of serious felony charges, specifically including burglary and robbery. And this is important because those specific criminal charges require a very specific psychological threshold that most ordinary people simply do not possess. Burglary is the felony crime of entering a private structure unlawfully with the intent to steal. It teaches you exactly how to move silently through a strange space that does not belong to you, how to successfully navigate in the pitch-black darkness without tripping, and how to entirely avoid waking the innocent people sleeping quietly inside. Robbery, on the other hand, is completely different from simple theft. Robbery requires direct physical confrontation. It teaches you how to effectively use raw intimidation, how to boldly face another terrified human being, and how to aggressively use physical force to completely take control of a highly chaotic situation. Because of that, these are not just random crimes recorded on a piece of government paper. They are fiercely practiced skills. When you logically combine the quiet stealth of a seasoned burglar with the violent physical confrontation of an experienced robber, you get the exact professional resume required to silently break into a secluded house and forcefully kidnap an 84-year-old woman in the dark middle of the cold night. Beyond the extensive criminal history, there is actual physical evidence directly linking the operative to the chilling doorbell footage. Former Federal Bureau of Investigation Supervisory Special Agent and renowned criminal profiler Jim Clement meticulously analyzed the security video of the masked suspect aggressively stepping onto Nancy Guthrie's front porch. While everyone else was looking at the cheap backpack and the incorrectly worn gun holster, Clementi pointed out a very specific, easily overlooked visual detail. Clement observed what heavily appears to be a distinct marking, possibly a permanent tattoo, clearly visible on the suspect's bare right wrist, as he confidently reaches out to tap the camera lens in the dark. Immediately, dedicated internet investigators went straight to work. They pulled up old, deeply archived live performance videos of the indie rock band Early Black playing at small venues. Sure enough, while closely analyzing blurry footage of Dominic Evans passionately playing the drums on stage, they spotted a dark, prominent, visible tattoo permanently inked on his lower right wrist, perfectly located in the exact same spot as the mysterious marking seen on the unknown suspect in the federal surveillance video. It is a stunning visual match that perfectly complements the official height and average build estimates provided by the federal authorities. However, if we are going to accurately follow the actual evidence in this documentary, we also have to be completely honest when the entire internet gets a major detail completely wrong. We absolutely cannot just recklessly spread blind online rumors. In the middle of February, specifically on the exact date of the 13th, heavily armed police tactical teams executed a massive, highly publicized raid at a residential house in the local suburban area. Social media instantly exploded with wild, unverified claims that the local police were finally kicking down the front door to officially arrest Dominic Evans. That viral rumor is completely false. According to official law enforcement reports, that specific tactical operation actually targeted a totally different 37-year-old man named Luke Daly, who sadly has his own entirely unrelated criminal history involving illegal substances. The proper authorities quickly clarified to the anxious public that Daley had absolutely no connection whatsoever to the tragic disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. Clearing up that false rumor is crucial because it clearly shows that our ongoing investigation is firmly grounded in documented reality, not wild internet hysteria. We do not need to invent fake raids to make Dominic Evans look guilty. His established criminal background involving burglary, his 19-year friendship with the suspected architect, his matching height, and the mysterious dark ink located on his right wrist already tell a terrifyingly compelling story all on their own. The pieces of this puzzle are falling into place, one by one, painting an undeniable picture of deception that no one saw coming until it was just entirely too late to stop it for good. At the same time, we have to look closely at a very disturbing piece of security footage recorded on the night of January 23rd, exactly 9 days before the actual kidnapping took place. This specific video was uploaded to a neighborhood safety application by a concerned resident living in the exact same geographic region. It shows an unidentified man wearing a dark hoodie and a backpack walking backward up a long residential driveway. This house was located exactly 6.5 miles away from Nancy Guthrie's front door. Why would a criminal intentionally walk backward in the pitch-black dark? Consumer security cameras, like the ones used in these neighborhoods, rely on motion sensors to wake up from their sleep mode. When a person steps into the frame, the camera needs 1 to 2 seconds to adjust to the low light and begin recording. By walking completely backward, this suspect physically hacked the technological lag time of the motion sensor. During those critical wake-up seconds, the camera only captured the back of his hoodie. By the time the lens was fully recording, his face was already hidden from view. He was not just wandering aimlessly through the quiet suburban streets. He was executing a highly calculated dress rehearsal to test the local security systems. What struck me here was the teamwork required. You don't run a rehearsal like that without someone watching your back. Think about the logistics of practicing a crime in a wealthy neighborhood. If you are walking backward up a stranger's driveway, you are incredibly vulnerable. You cannot see what is in front of you. You cannot see if a patrol car is suddenly turning the corner. You need a second pair of eyes. You need an architect sitting in a dark vehicle, parked safely down the street, communicating with you, timing your approach, and monitoring the neighborhood's reaction. That's when the two-man theory transforms from a wild internet guess into a logical tactical necessity. The architect and the operative were undeniably working together on January 23rd, fine-tuning their dark performance before bringing it to Nancy's doorstep. Once the dress rehearsal was successfully completed and the actual kidnapping was executed 9 days later, the immediate problem became transportation. Where do you take a hostage in the middle of the night without being seen by countless neighborhood cameras or highway patrol officers? This is where the geographic analysis of the area becomes incredibly terrifying. If you drive exactly 60 miles south of Tucson, you will reach an extremely isolated rural community called Rio Rico. Rio Rico is situated dangerously close to the international border. It is a sparsely populated desert landscape filled with large, secluded properties, unmarked dirt roads, and deep valleys where shadows completely swallow vehicles whole. It is the absolute perfect place for a person to disappear without leaving a single trace behind. The driving route from the Catalina foothills to Rio Rico is practically a straight shot down Interstate 19. In the dead of night, with absolutely zero traffic on the highway, making that drive takes roughly 50 minutes. Let us carefully do the math on this timeline. If the operative successfully secured the victim and drove away from the crime scene at approximately 2:30 in the morning, they could easily arrive in the hidden darkness of Rio Rico by 3:20 in the morning. After spending a few brief moments securing the location, or handing off the hostage. The driver could immediately turn the vehicle around and head straight back north toward the city. Taking that same empty highway, they would arrive comfortably back at their own home in the Tucson suburbs by 4:10 in the morning. This calculated schedule provides the absolute perfect chronological window to commit the crime, hide the victim, and return to bed long before the sun ever rises over the desert horizon. It is a chillingly efficient timeline that leaves no room for error and requires exact precision. They utilized the dress rehearsal to guarantee their stealth. They utilized their deep friendship to maintain absolute trust, and they utilized the desolate geography of southern Arizona to completely erase the victim from the map. Every single detail was meticulously planned by the architect and ruthlessly executed by the operative. When you carefully consider the immense distance traveled, the total isolation of the southern border landscape, and the flawless coordination of this specific driving schedule, the chilling truth becomes undeniably clear. The masterminds behind this terrifying abduction knew exactly how to manipulate time, distance, and deep shadows to ensure their ultimate success without ever facing any immediate consequences from the local city police forces. We have talked extensively about the physical timeline, the driving routes, and the security cameras. But a criminal can only control so much of the physical world before they inevitably make a mistake on a microscopic level. The authorities have confirmed a devastating piece of evidence that completely shatters the theory of a single perpetrator acting alone in the dark. Investigators officially announced that they recovered two completely separate and distinct biological profiles connected to this horrific crime. One biological profile belongs to an unknown male, and the other belongs to a different unknown individual. If there is only one suspect, there should only be one profile. Having two distinct profiles changes the entire foundation of this investigation permanently. Let us look at exactly where these two profiles were discovered. One sample was recovered directly from inside Nancy Guthrie's home, the very place where the elderly woman was taken from her bed. The second sample was extracted from a discarded glove found alongside a road approximately 2 miles away from the crime scene. What I found was, this was not just any standard winter glove. It was a black nitrile glove. Nitrile gloves are specifically used in scientific laboratories and medical settings. They are the exact type of gloves used every single day by advanced placement biology teachers. Someone like the architect of this plan would have boxes of them sitting in his garage. The operative wore these gloves, but he made the fatal error of throwing one out the window during the frantic escape. Which means, we are no longer looking at a solitary stalker or a lone wolf wandering the desert at night. One profile equals a lone individual acting on impulse. Two profiles equal a highly coordinated criminal network. The mathematics of the biological evidence absolutely guarantee that at least two people were physically involved in the execution of this abduction. One person was inside the house leaving microscopic traces, while another person was handling the outer perimeter and the getaway vehicle, eventually discarding the nitrile glove on the side of the road. The existence of these two separate profiles provides the absolute biological proof needed to thoroughly validate the complex theory of the architect and the operative working together in the shadows to complete their terrible mission seamlessly. So, how do the federal agents turn these two anonymous profiles into actual names? They are currently utilizing advanced investigative genetic genealogy testing. This is the exact same forensic science used to catch the most notorious serial killers decades after their crimes. Even if the suspects have never been arrested before, the authorities do not need their specific genetic material to be in the national database. They just need a distant cousin or a relative to have used a commercial ancestry website. The dedicated investigators are currently building massive family trees, tracing every single branch back through the generations until those branches rapidly narrow down to the exact individuals who left their biological evidence behind that cold night. The science is incredibly precise, and it is quietly closing in on the terrifying duo right now. They cannot hide from their own biology forever. The absolute truth is coming very soon. When the genealogical results finally return safely from the private laboratory, everything will instantly change. If those two biological profiles mathematically trace back to the exact same social circle of two close friends who formed an independent band 19 years ago, then every single bizarre coincidence we have analyzed today transforms directly into undeniable hard evidence that no defense attorney could ever easily explain away in a courtroom. We have established the biological evidence, but human biology is not the only thing that leaves a permanent trace. Psychology and digital footprints are just as loud. Let us look closely at the ransom communications, because criminals under intense pressure always talk too much. Throughout this investigation, multiple emails demanding millions of dollars in Bitcoin were sent directly to the media outlet TMZ. Why would a professional kidnapper negotiate through a celebrity gossip site instead of contacting the wealthy family directly? They do it to create a very specific public narrative. But if you read the actual text of those messages, the carefully constructed narrative completely falls apart, and the psychological cracks begin to heavily show. In the earliest emails sent to TMZ, the anonymous tipster specifically used the exact phrase "the main individual" to describe the person who took Nancy Guthrie. Think about that specific choice of words. You do not ever say "the main individual" if you are talking about a lone wolf stalker acting entirely on his own. That specific language implies a clear organizational hierarchy. It implies that the sender fully understands there are multiple layers to this dark operation, with one person acting as the primary orchestrator and others acting in secondary roles. Furthermore, the sender explicitly stated that they were gambling with their own personal safety and possible freedom, noting that they were standing dangerously close to the flame. That is not the cold, calculated language of a master architect. That is the terrified psychology of a panicked peripheral accomplice. It sounds exactly like someone who was heavily involved in the planning or logistics, but is now absolutely horrified by the massive federal response. They know exactly who the main individual is, and they are desperately trying to position themselves safely before the entire house of cards comes crashing completely down. The thing is, the sender of those emails is absolutely right to be terrified, because the digital trap has already been perfectly set. While the internet is obsessing over matching facial hair and wrist tattoos, the Federal Bureau of Investigation is executing one of the most powerful digital tracking methods in modern law enforcement. They are conducting a massive cell tower dump. A cell tower dump allows investigators to pull the identification data for every single mobile device that connected to the specific cellular towers covering a geographic area during a specific window of time. If you are planning a high-stakes abduction for the 1st of February, you know exactly what to do. You intentionally leave your personal cell phone sitting on your nightstand plugged into the charger. You manufacture a flawless digital alibi. But January 23rd was completely different. January 23rd was the secret dress rehearsal. It was supposed to be completely invisible, because the architect and the operative felt entirely safe and undetected that night. They almost certainly got extremely sloppy. They probably had their personal phones sitting right inside their pockets. They probably drove their own registered vehicles. They connected to the cell towers along the route because they did not think anyone would ever have a reason to look at that random date. Meanwhile, federal agents are now successfully pulling the data from the towers covering the exact area of the dress rehearsal, located 6.5 miles from the crime scene. They are actively hunting for the specific phones that pinged on January 23rd between 1 and 3 in the morning. Then, they are taking that exact list of devices and overlaying it with the phones detected near the crime scene on the 1st of February. They are desperately hunting for the exact same numbers appearing in both digital datasets. If the federal agents find 2 specific cell phones registered to 2 specific men who have been best friends for 19 years pinging together at the rehearsal site, the investigation is essentially over. There is absolutely no defense attorney in the entire world who can logically explain away that level of undeniable digital coordination. Faking an alibi for one planned night is difficult but totally possible. Faking an alibi for 2 random nights separated by 9 days is completely impossible. At this point, their silence is deafening. 2 men connected by almost 2 decades, both completely dark while the FBI circles. Neither Tommaso Cioni nor Dominic Evans has released a single public statement. They have not defended themselves on television. They have not posted on social media. They have simply vanished from the public eye. When 2 men who share a deep 19-year friendship suddenly go entirely quiet at the exact same time during a massive federal kidnapping investigation, it does not look like innocent confusion. It looks exactly like a highly coordinated defense strategy. They are both just waiting. We have journeyed through a labyrinth of hidden evidence, tracking a deeply disturbing timeline that the official police reports simply glossed over in the very beginning. We have closely examined the missing 4 hours on the cold night of January 31st, the suspicious legal documents signed exactly 8 months prior, and the dark, unforced iron security gate intentionally left wide open for a midnight intruder. We looked at the biological impossibility of a towering sun in law fitting the specific physical description of a masked man who stands exactly 5 feet 9 inches tall. And then, we found the missing piece to that puzzle. We found a drummer with a documented criminal record for burglary and robbery, a man who has shared a deep 19-year friendship with the prime suspect. We found 2 distinct biological profiles, safely recovered from the area, officially confirming the dangerous presence of 2 completely separate perpetrators working together. We found the digital trap of the January 23rd dress rehearsal. My takeaway from all this isn't about playing judge and jury. It's about not ignoring the pattern when the puzzle pieces of 2 men fit perfectly together. In other words, when you step back and look at the entire board, the narrative of a random, lone wolf stranger completely shatters into a million pieces. There is a massive, important lesson sitting right at the absolute core of this terrifying, ongoing investigation, and it is a lesson about the dangerous illusion of a perfect cover. You can be a highly intelligent architect, a respected advanced placement biology teacher who understands exactly how to avoid leaving traces in a house you know intimately. You can hire a deeply experienced operative, a man whose dark past taught him exactly how to violently confront victims and silently navigate through shadows. You can meticulously plan every single operational detail down to the exact late-night driving route leading straight to a desolate, isolated desert border town. But no matter how brilliantly designed a criminal plan might seem on paper, human nature always creates a fatal crack in the foundation. Sometimes, that crack is born from pure arrogance. The extreme confidence it takes to run a fully masked dress rehearsal 9 days early in a wealthy neighborhood is the exact same arrogance that makes you forget about the digital footprint pinging loudly and repeatedly from the personal cellular phone resting carelessly inside your heavy winter jacket pocket. And sometimes, that crack is purely psychological. The panicked, desperate emails sent to the media, talking about the main individual and standing too close to the flame, reveal the frantic, uncontrollable terror of a panicked peripheral accomplice suddenly realizing that the massive federal government is rapidly closing in on them fast. The reason this matters is Law enforcement does not just rely on physical evidence, they heavily rely on undeniable human weakness to solve mysteries. Right now, there is a staggering financial bounty hanging directly over this case. The official reward for any information leading to an arrest has skyrocketed to a massive $200,000. That is an absolutely life-changing amount of money. In the dark underworld of criminal conspiracies, cold hard cash possesses a terrifying power to completely break even the absolute strongest human loyalty ever forged. A 19-year friendship built on independent music and shared secrets might feel incredibly strong when everything is going perfectly well. But when federal agents are kicking down doors, executing tactical raids, and holding a massive check for $200,000 in front of frightened accomplices, that deep loyalty evaporates instantly into thin air. Someone always talks to save themselves. Do you think the 19-year friendship between the architect and the operative will survive the pressure of a $200,000 reward and an FBI DNA match? Drop your final verdict in the comments. Which tells us the final chapter of this horrific true crime story is already being written inside a secure laboratory right now. The incredibly advanced genealogical analysis machine is currently running without stopping, carefully mapping out every single branch of the family trees attached to those two anonymous biological profiles recovered directly from the deeply disturbing crime scene. The authorities are matching distant cousins, mapping out bloodlines, and narrowing the absolute truth down to a specific street address in the desert. Nancy Guthrie is still tragically missing, and her desperate family is still enduring an absolutely unimaginable nightmare every single passing day. But the advanced forensic science is quietly, relentlessly hunting for the hidden monsters in the dark. The DNA doesn't lie. It doesn't care about a 19-year friendship. It's going to point to a name, and the only question left is, will it point to the men who thought they had the perfect plan? Thank you so much for watching this video. I truly appreciate your time and support as we dive into these complex cases together. If you found this investigation interesting, please like, subscribe, and share it with others. Your engagement helps uncover the truth. See you in the next deep dive. Imagine waking up one morning to find out you are the most hated person in America. This is the reality of a man who just survived absolute hell and is finally speaking out. He is not a suspect denying a crime. He is Dominic Evans, a 48-year-old fifth-grade math teacher who is desperately trying to win his life back from thousands of ruthless internet judges. For over a month, he was relentlessly smeared across every social media platform as a highly dangerous federal criminal. Now, after weeks of enduring this nightmare, he is facing the public. His spoken words reveal a truly terrifying dark side of the true crime community. It forces us to ask a chilling question. What exactly happens when you become the main character of a massive conspiracy theory without even knowing it? How do you prove your innocence to the internet when thousands of people have already decided you are a monster? I wanted to understand how an innocent man fights back against a digital mob. So, I started digging into Dominic Evans's official statements, the exact timeline of the accusations, and his direct interviews, and what I found is honestly terrifying. Let us step back for a moment and look at who Dominic Evans actually is before this massive nightmare consumed his entire existence. Imagine living a perfectly normal, quiet, and ordinary life in the sunny city of Tucson. Dominic is a 48-year-old man. He spends his days standing at the front of a classroom as a dedicated fifth-grade math teacher. His world revolves around simple things like creating lesson plans, grading papers, and helping young kids understand fractions. At home, his life is just as grounded, stable, and wholesome. He is happily married to Andrea Evans, who is a highly respected school principal in their local community. Together, they are raising their young children, building a safe, predictable, and joyous environment. They are exactly the kind of family you would expect to see at a weekend neighborhood barbecue or a middle school play. There were no dark secrets hiding in the closet, no shady double lives being lived in the shadows, and absolutely no signs of anything even remotely sinister. But then, a major, high-profile criminal case broke out in their area, sending shockwaves through the local community and the entire country. Desperate for immediate answers and hungry for a clear villain, thousands of amateur detectives on true crime forums began aggressively digging into every possible detail related to the victim's family. They were frantically looking for anyone who might fit the profile of a mastermind. Suddenly, Dominic's name appeared on their radar. Why him? It all came down to one incredibly fragile, almost invisible thread. You see, Dominic has a lifelong passion for music. A long time ago, he played the drums in a local rock band called Early Black. Another member of that exact same band happened to be Tommaso Cioni. And Tommaso Cioni just so happens to be the son-in-law of the victim at the center of this massive, highly publicized case. That is it. That was the massive smoking gun the internet found. They played music together in a local band. When the online mob started putting these completely random pieces together, they painted Dominic as an intimate, close insider who had deep access to the family's darkest secrets and daily routines. However, according to Dominic's own official statements, this grand conspiracy was nothing but a complete fantasy created by bored strangers. He stated on the record that he had only met the victim's family exactly one single time in his entire life. That isolated meeting took place during an Easter celebration way back in the year 2011. He was not a close family friend. He was not a trusted confidant. He was just a guy who knew a guy through a local music group, and they briefly crossed paths more than a decade ago. The thing is, the internet doesn't care about the context of your life once they find a thread to pull. They did not care that he was a devoted public school teacher. They did not care that he was a loving father and husband. They only saw a name loosely connected to a person of interest. What struck me here was how a completely benign connection from 15 years ago was immediately weaponized to destroy a man's life. It is truly terrifying to realize that a simple past hobby can be twisted into a massive motive for a terrible criminal act without any logical proof, leaving absolute and total destruction behind him. Once the internet mob found that incredibly weak link connecting Dominic to the family through his old music band, they needed something more. A casual acquaintance is not enough to build a compelling true crime narrative. They desperately needed a villain origin story. They needed to prove to the world that this quiet, unassuming math teacher had a dark, deeply hidden criminal past that perfectly aligned with their wild theories. So, thousands of amateur sleuths essentially turned themselves into unauthorized private investigators. They ruthlessly scoured through public databases, background check websites, and digital court archives, determined to find absolutely any piece of dirt they could use against him. And unfortunately, if you dig deep enough into almost anyone's past, you can usually find a mistake. For Dominic, that mistake happened 27 years ago. They dug all the way back to the year 1999 to uncover a very old, relatively minor police record. Back then, as a much younger man who had drank way too much alcohol, Dominic was arrested for stealing a computer and a watch while he was heavily intoxicated. On top of that, they also found a record for driving under the influence of alcohol. Now, logically speaking, making a foolish, drunken mistake in your early 20s does not automatically transform you into a highly sophisticated, calculated kidnapper 3 decades later. But the online detectives did not care about logic, nuance, or personal growth. They immediately took this 27-year-old petty theft and driving charge and proudly paraded it across every single true crime forum as absolute, indisputable proof of his fundamentally flawed character. They framed a careless, youthful error as the definitive psychological profile of a dangerous, lifelong offender who was completely capable of pulling off a massive federal crime. But character assassination was only the very first step in their relentless campaign. The online mob also needed physical evidence to tie him directly to the terrifying footage captured at the actual crime scene. Since they did not have access to real police files, DNA results, or official investigative tools, they decided to completely weaponize his personal social media accounts instead. Hundreds of anonymous users flooded his public Facebook profile, downloading every single picture he had ever posted of himself, his family, and his daily life. And then, people started treating these zoomed-in, pixelated Facebook photos as undeniable forensic proof. They took completely normal, everyday photos of Dominic smiling at family gatherings or standing in his classroom and placed them right next to the dark, grainy, and incredibly blurry doorbell camera image of the masked suspect. Because the suspect was heavily disguised, they could not compare facial features like a nose or a mouth. So, they hyper-focused on the only things they could see. They started drawing crazy, neon-colored geometric lines over his face to measure the exact distance between his eyes. They passionately debated the specific arch of his eyebrows. They meticulously analyzed his overall body structure and passionately argued that his height, which sits right around 1 meter and 75 centimeters to 1 meter and 77 centimeters, was an absolute, perfect match for the shadowy figure standing in the dark. They built an entire guilty verdict based entirely on fragments of pixels and wild imagination. They had successfully convinced themselves, and thousands of other people watching the drama unfold online, that they had successfully caught the real criminal. Look at how they mapped his face online. Do you guys actually see a definitive match here, or is this just pure confirmation bias? Let me know down in the comments. I genuinely read every single one of your responses, and your unique insights often reveal fascinating things that absolutely everyone else completely misses. Because when you step back and truly look at the situation objectively, it becomes incredibly clear how dangerous this digital trial really was. They did not actually find a kidnapper. They simply built a monster out of fragments, using a stolen computer from 1999, a common height measurement, and a few blurry photos to completely destroy an innocent man who had absolutely nothing to do with any of this terrible, heartbreaking tragedy. It is one thing when angry strangers are screaming your name loudly in the chaotic void of the vast internet. It is an entirely different, chilling level of terror when those same strangers suddenly figure out exactly where you sleep at night. The digital witch hunt against Dominic Evans did not just stay confined to message boards and social media comments. It rapidly escalated into a terrifying, real-world physical threat through a process known as doxing. Malicious individuals scoured the internet, located the exact physical address of his private family home, and broadcasted those personal details to thousands of angry, paranoid people who were absolutely convinced that a dangerous federal criminal was living right inside. Suddenly, the safe haven where Dominic and his wife Andrea raised their children was completely compromised. The boundaries between a crazy online conspiracy theory and their actual reality completely shattered in an instant. The consequences of this massive privacy breach were immediate and deeply chilling. Strangers took the online theories off their computer screens and brought them directly to Dominic's front yard. He began suddenly witnessing highly suspicious, unfamiliar vehicles slowly creeping down his usually quiet residential street, their engines rumbling menacingly in the otherwise silent neighborhood. These strange cars were not just passing through the neighborhood. They were deliberately stopping and parking directly outside of his property. Sometimes, The vehicles would just sit there, idling heavily in the dark, from the late hours of the night stretching all the way until 2 or 3 in the morning. The terrifying glare of headlights would randomly sweep across the front of their house, illuminating the windows and casting long, haunting shadows across their living room walls. It was a psychological torment. Dominic and Andrea had absolutely no idea who these people were, what kind of weapons they might have, or what violent actions they were planning to take against their family under the cover of darkness. Trapped inside their own house, the family experienced a level of pure, unadulterated panic that most of us can barely even imagine. Andrea Evans, a respected school principal who usually handles stressful situations with grace and authority, was completely paralyzed by the overwhelming threat outside her door. She later described the horrific, suffocating feeling to reporters, stating that she felt completely and utterly scared numb. To minimize the chances of being targeted through the vulnerable glass panes, Dominic was forced to walk through the entire house and carefully turn off absolutely every single light. They plunged their entire home into pitch black darkness. They quietly retreated and hid together in their master bedroom, moving silently across the cold floorboards. Dominic would occasionally creep up to the windows, slightly parting the blinds just enough to nervously peek outside at the shadowy figures lingering around his property. They were held hostage by an invisible, faceless mob that had collectively decided they were guilty without a single shred of actual legal proof. As the terrifying, sleepless nights dragged on with no end in sight, the immediate physical danger to his loved ones became far too massive to simply ignore. The most agonizing realization for any parent is knowing that you cannot properly protect your own children inside your own home. Fearing that some unhinged internet vigilante might try to break down their front door or do something even more catastrophic, Dominic and Andrea had to make a truly heartbreaking choice. They packed up their young sons and sent them away to stay safely in a different, undisclosed location. They had to separate their family just to ensure their little boys would remain physically safe from the unpredictable madness gathering outside. Because of that, the Evans family was forced into survival mode in their own home. They were no longer just dealing with a few crazy rumors or internet gossip. They were fighting to survive a very real, very dangerous, and completely unjustified siege created entirely by reckless people who simply wanted to play the grand role of a hero in a thrilling true crime story, completely ignoring the massive, permanent psychological destruction they were brutally causing to an innocent, hard-working family who did absolutely nothing wrong to deserve this horrifying treatment. When you are accused of a massive federal crime by tens of thousands of strangers on the internet, the natural human instinct for many people would be to completely panic, hide away, delete every single social media account, and wait in absolute silence for the terrifying storm to eventually pass. But Dominic Evans did not do that. He knew he was an innocent man, a simple 5th grade math teacher, and he knew that hiding would only make the rabid online mob believe their wild conspiracy theories were actually correct. He realized that the only way to stop this runaway train of public destruction was to go straight to the highest authorities in the country. He did not wait for federal agents to kick down his front door in the middle of the night. Instead, Dominic made the incredibly brave and proactive decision to voluntarily present himself directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Pima County Sheriff's Department. He walked right into the center of the official investigation, ready to face whatever tough questions they had prepared for him. When he sat down with the highly trained federal investigators and local detectives, he did not need a team of expensive, high-powered defense attorneys to spin a complicated narrative. He just needed to tell the simple, boring truth. According to the official records, the entire interview between Dominic Evans and the federal authorities lasted for exactly 40 minutes. That is it. Just 40 minutes. In less than 3/4 of an hour, Dominic laid out his exact whereabouts during the precise window of time when the terrible crime took place. The authorities knew that the kidnapping occurred in the very early hours of the morning, specifically right around 2:30. So, they simply asked Dominic where he was at 2:30 in the morning on that specific date. His answer was the most ordinary, mundane reality imaginable for a 48-year-old father and husband. He was at home, sleeping in his own bed, right next to his wife, Andrea, with his young children sleeping safely in their own rooms just down the hallway. He provided a rock-solid, ironclad alibi that was easily verifiable by his family and the digital footprint of a normal, peaceful household at rest. The federal agents and local detectives are professionals. They know exactly how to spot a lie, how to cross-reference timelines, and how to verify an alibi. After thoroughly reviewing his statements and checking his timeline, they realized immediately that they were looking at an innocent man who had been tragically caught in the crosshairs of a digital witch hunt. They did not drag the process out for weeks or months. Recognizing the extreme, life-threatening danger that Dominic and his family were currently facing from the enraged public, the authorities took swift and decisive action. They immediately issued an official public statement completely eliminating Dominic Evans as a suspect in the kidnapping case. They made it unequivocally clear to the public and the media that this fifth-grade math teacher had absolutely zero involvement in the horrific, violent crime they were actively investigating. At this point, law enforcement officially looks at his alibi and completely clears his name. The official investigators, the people with actual badges, real forensic tools, and decades of professional experience, looked at the absolute entirety of his life and his whereabouts, and they definitively closed the book on Dominic Evans. The federal government officially declared him to be an innocent man. You would think that this would be the grand, triumphant moment where the internet mob collectively apologizes, deletes their defamatory posts, and moves on to find the actual real criminal. You would assume that an official exoneration from the Federal Bureau of Investigation would instantly shut down the crazy rumors and finally give this severely traumatized family their peaceful, quiet life back. This is the part I couldn't get past. How does a 40-minute conversation with federal agents completely dismantle thousands of hours of online investigation? Yet the internet still refuses to back down. It is completely mind-boggling. The online sleuths had spent countless days and nights drawing crazy lines on pixelated photos, digging up a 27-year-old petty theft record, and connecting imaginary dots to a local rock band, convinced they were smarter than the police. Yet, a simple, 40-minute conversation grounded in actual reality completely destroyed their entire grand narrative. But instead of accepting the official truth, the mob doubled down, proving that for many of these amateur detectives, it was never actually about finding justice for the victim. It was only about protecting their own egos and feeding their dangerous obsession, no matter who they ultimately had to relentlessly destroy in the complicated process. When an ordinary person is officially cleared of a massive federal crime by the highest investigative authorities in the country, you would naturally expect that the nightmare would immediately come to a sudden and peaceful end. You would assume that the fifth-grade math teacher could finally step out of the dark, turn the lights back on inside his own home, and bring his young children back to their bedrooms. But surviving a digital witch hunt is not like winning a battle in a traditional court of law. In a real court, a verdict of not guilty means you are legally free to walk away and resume your normal life. On the internet, however, there is absolutely no gavel to strike, no final judge to dismiss the completely fabricated charges, and no official mechanism to completely erase the devastating damage that has already been permanently inflicted upon your personal reputation. For Dominic Evans, The federal exoneration was merely a legal shield. It did not heal the profound psychological wounds, and it certainly did not give him his stolen life back. After enduring weeks of absolute terror, suffocating anxiety, and relentless public humiliation, Dominic finally reached his breaking point. He could no longer remain silent, while his entire identity was being continuously dragged through the mud. He decided to speak directly to the public, offering a heartbreaking glimpse into the crushing reality of becoming an unwilling main character in a viral true crime conspiracy theory. Speaking to the press, Dominic delivered a statement that perfectly captures the profound helplessness and devastating agony of his situation. His words were not filled with explosive anger, but rather a deep, exhausting sorrow. He stated, quote, "I feel like somebody stole my name. I don't know why, for money, for clicks, for attention, for entertainment. But innocent people are getting hurt." End quote. Let us truly pause and deeply analyze the immense weight of that specific phrase. I feel like somebody stole my name. Your name is the very foundation of your existence. It represents your lifelong hard work, your personal integrity, your professional career, and your family legacy. In a matter of days, thousands of anonymous strangers violently hijacked his name and completely redefined who he was. They stripped away his identity as a loving father and a dedicated teacher, replacing it with the horrific caricature of a violent monster. And perhaps the most sickening part of his entire statement is his realization of their motives. He recognized that the mob was not actually driven by a noble pursuit of justice for an 84-year-old missing woman. They were doing it for clicks, for money, for attention, and most disturbingly, for pure entertainment. True crime had become a twisted spectator sport, and Dominic was nothing more than a disposable pawn sacrificed for their daily amusement. He was essentially forced to watch completely helpless, as his entire life was turned into content for greedy content creators and bored armchair detectives looking for a quick thrill. The absolute tragedy here is that the internet essentially commodified his suffering, turning his terrifying reality into a gripping podcast episode or a sensationalized video essay. What happened next was a stark realization of how toxic the true crime community can be. Even after the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the local sheriff's department released their official, undeniable statements completely clearing his name and verifying his ironclad alibi, a massive portion of the online mob completely refused to back down. Instead of feeling guilty, deleting their defamatory posts, or issuing sincere apologies to the innocent family they had just relentlessly terrorized, they stubbornly doubled down on their completely baseless theories. They aggressively pivoted their narrative to claim that the police were either completely incompetent or deliberately participating in a massive, corrupt cover-up to protect a middle school math teacher. They insisted that the 40-minute federal interview was a total sham, and that Dominic was somehow manipulating the highest levels of federal law enforcement. It is absolutely terrifying to witness a massive group of people completely reject verified reality simply because it ruins their highly entertaining narrative. They would much rather destroy an innocent man forever than admit they made a terrible mistake. This blew my mind. Why do you think people refuse to let go of a theory, even when the FBI explicitly says it's wrong? Is it just ego or something else? Tell me what you think. I truly want to read your deepest thoughts down below, because trying to understand this dangerous level of mass delusion is incredibly difficult for me. We must seriously ask ourselves what happens to our fragile society when the undeniable truth no longer matters at all, and a stolen name becomes just another piece of forgotten, meaningless internet content. The situation escalated to such an extreme level that the highest local law enforcement official had to personally intervene in the public discourse. Sheriff Chris Nanos of the Pima County Sheriff Department was forced to go on national television to aggressively defend a completely innocent man from the relentless attacks of internet vigilantes. It is incredibly rare for a sheriff overseeing an active, massive federal investigation to take time away from the case to address a targeted cyberbullying campaign. However, the sheer volume of the harassment directed at the fifth-grade math teacher left him absolutely no other choice. During his highly publicized television appearance, Sheriff Nanos did not mince his words or attempt to sugarcoat the horrific reality. He explicitly stated to the viewing public and the media that the Evans family was, in his exact words, going through hell. He firmly reiterated that Dominic had a solid, verified alibi and was completely cleared of any involvement in the crime. But the sheriff went even further than just issuing a standard exoneration to the press, recognizing the massive, unjustified destruction of personal character that had taken place. Sheriff Nanos officially advised Dominic to hire a high-powered lawyer. He publicly encouraged the devastated teacher to track down the anonymous individuals on the internet who had maliciously spread these lies and actively sue them in a civil court of law for severe defamation. This was a truly powerful and incredibly profound moment in the entire history of this heartbreaking and deeply disturbing true crime investigation process. Law enforcement was essentially telling an innocent citizen that, while the police department could protect his physical body, only a civil lawsuit could penalize the digital mob that destroyed his peaceful life. But a civil lawsuit, even a highly successful one, simply cannot fully erase the permanent damage that has already been inflicted. The basic and fundamental truth is that the vast internet is completely forever. When a malicious accusation goes viral, it spreads rapidly across hundreds of social media platforms, creating an unstoppable avalanche of digital content. Even after the official federal clearance, and even after Dominic bravely broke his silence to share his immense pain, the digital ecosystem stubbornly refuses to correct itself. If you go to the Google search engine today and type in the specific name Dominic Evans, the predictive text and the first page of search results do not prominently display his wholesome life as a dedicated educator. Instead, his personal identity is now permanently tethered to horrifying keywords like suspect, kidnapping, and federal crime. The search engine algorithm does not understand the delicate nuance of an official police exoneration. It only registers the massive volume of clicks and comments that originally linked his name to this devastating tragedy. Every single time he applies for a new teaching position, tries to rent a house, or meets a new group of parents at his school, those toxic search results will be waiting right there in the digital shadows. A professional background check might come back completely clean, but a quick internet search will forever paint him as the man who was once accused of a horrific kidnapping by thousands of people. The true tragedy here is that an official exoneration from the authorities cannot wash away a massive digital footprint. The viral videos, true crime podcast episodes, and the thousands of defamatory forum posts still exist in the searchable archives of the internet, waiting to be rediscovered by anyone who casually searches his name. Meanwhile, an innocent family is left trying to pick up the pieces of their completely shattered reputation. They have to wake up every single morning and face a local community that watched their agonizing nightmare unfold in real time. They have to somehow explain to their terrified children why their home was suddenly surrounded by strange cars in the middle of the night. At this point, I started questioning who holds these online mobs accountable when they get it so dangerously wrong. The anonymous people who casually made the false accusations simply closed their laptops and easily moved on to the next mystery without a second thought. They faced absolutely zero consequences for recklessly tearing an innocent family apart. There are simply no internet jails for unchecked digital speculation today. There are no fines for completely ruining a reputation from the safety of a living room couch. The amateur detectives got to walk away, completely unscathed, leaving a permanent trail of sheer devastation behind them forever. which tells us the digital pursuit of justice can easily mutate into a blind witch hunt if we aren't careful. Over the past decade, the true crime genre has evolved from a passive form of entertainment into a global phenomenon. Millions of people tune into podcasts, watch documentaries, and participate in online forums dedicated to solving cold cases. The original intention behind this massive community is often quite noble. People genuinely want to help law enforcement catch dangerous criminals and bring closure to devastated families. However, the tragic case of the 48-year-old fifth-grade math teacher forces us to confront the dark underbelly of this internet culture. When amateur sleuths sit behind computer screens, completely detached from the human reality of the situations they are analyzing, they lose sight of the immense damage they can cause. They forget that the names they type into search engines belong to real human beings with real families, careers, and lives that can be instantly destroyed by a baseless accusation. The courageous public statement made by Dominic is a costly lesson regarding the ethical boundaries that must exist within the modern true crime era. For centuries, our legal system has been built upon the foundational principle of the presumption of innocence. A person is considered completely innocent until they are definitively proven guilty in a legitimate court of law. This vital doctrine is absolutely essential for protecting civil liberties. But this case proves that the presumption of innocence cannot merely be a legal standard used exclusively inside a courtroom. It must absolutely become a moral standard that we strictly apply on the internet as well. When we rush to prematurely convict an innocent person based on flimsy evidence simply to satisfy our own morbid curiosity, we are not finding justice. We are merely replicating trauma and actively multiplying the evil present in the world by creating entirely new victims. The psychological toll of this digital harassment is something that society has not yet fully learned how to properly manage. We live in an age where information travels at the speed of light, and a single rumor can reach millions of people in hours. What I found was that stealing someone's reputation takes only a few clicks, but getting it back might take a lifetime. A completely anonymous user can create a fabricated story, hit publish, and immediately walk away without ever facing a single consequence. Meanwhile, the target of that story wakes up to a completely shattered reality. Even though federal authorities cleared Dominic of suspicion, the terrifying digital footprint left behind by the mob remains permanently etched into the internet archives. He will spend his life constantly explaining himself, fighting the invisible shadows of a crime he never committed. This deeply unsettling reality requires a massive cultural shift in how we interact with true crime media. We must hold ourselves and our online communities to a much higher standard of absolute accountability and endless empathy. We must constantly remind ourselves that behind every sensational headline and every trending hashtag is a vulnerable human life hanging in the balance. It is perfectly fine to be interested in mysteries and to desire justice for victims, but we must strictly police our own behavior. We must completely reject the dangerous urge to participate in digital mob violence. This brings us to a crucial conversation that we absolutely need to have right now. Where do we draw the line between trying to help solve a crime and becoming a digital vigilante? I'd really like to hear your perspective on this, so drop your thoughts below. Your insights and your personal reflections are incredibly valuable as we try to navigate this complex digital world together. In the end, Dominic Evans finally broke his silence, confronted his unseen attackers, and courageously reclaimed his stolen name. He stood up against the overwhelming pressure of a massive internet trial, and against all odds, he survived the horrifying ordeal. He can finally begin the long, incredibly painful process of healing his family and rebuilding his deeply fractured life in Tucson. But, while thousands of people were busy terrorizing a fifth-grade math teacher, the real criminal was given the ultimate gift: time and distraction. The actual person who walked up to that house in the dark, The individual, who is truly responsible for the tragic disappearance, was able to slip further away into the shadows while the entire world was completely focused on the wrong target. By completely creating a massive online circus, the wild internet inadvertently acted as the perfect protective shield for a highly dangerous perpetrator. We handed the actual kidnapper an incredibly precious head start wrapped up in pure viral chaos. So, who really truly benefits when the internet blindly chases the totally wrong man? Thank you so much for watching this video today. I really appreciate your time and support. If you enjoyed this true crime documentary, please make sure to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel for more content. Your engagement helps me uncover more important stories.